We'll start. Do the gallery view so some of you may show up. uh, okay, this lecture is going to be one that I think a lot of you will find particularly interesting because it's about the classical ancient Greek era or period when things that we now still have, or at least we have some versions of in our modern world, democracy, philosophy, Greek classical style in architecture and sculpture, these things we still see around us, first originated in this period in Greek history. So that's the main topic for tonight. We're going to start with the period just before classical Greek mainland culture, and that would be called archaic. I'll explain that in a few minutes. And I'll give you some context as we, build up to the first slide. I always like to give you a little bit of background, but we'll do that in a few minutes. And then at the end, we'll end early tonight, I'm sure. We should be able to, let me admit one more person down here, have about 20 minutes or so to see my own slides of mainland Greece, not the islands. We saw those last week. That was Minoan culture. This is different. Even though today, those islands that we saw last week are part of the modern nation of Greece. They weren't part of ancient Greece, at least before Alexander the Great came along and conquered everything around it, the Mediterranean. But we're talking about the period when the mainland of Greece had its most famous cities, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Olympus. And I'm going to show you my own slides of Athens and of Olympus, which is where they believe the Greek gods would have resided according to their mythology or their religion. Okay, but first, let's do this. I want to get to see the speaker view here, because what I want to do is hold up a couple of images. Let's see, this should work. Yeah, where I can see what I'm showing you. That's for the first few minutes, we're going to go over just to clarify and answer any questions you have. You can, of course, you can ask them by email at any point before the paper's due, but please don't wait till the night before the due date. It's due 1 week from tonight, your first short paper. It's worth a quarter of your grade, so it's pretty important. You have the option of sending me a draft or final, semi-final version, as long as you don't wait again until 24 hours for the due date, say 48 hours or earlier, 2 days or more before it's due. And I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And I will answer or tell you by email, of course, if you're missing anything. And that's what a couple people have already done. And I can see those people are going to get A's on their papers. So that's an option. And of course, any other questions you have. But now is a good time to ask questions that are already on your mind. So let's start with the fact that when you send the papers, I gave you or emailed to you all the cover sheet. And that's a one-page PDF, which needs to be combined or attached to your another person to admit to your paper file, so that it becomes a single file, so that cover sheet is how we grade the paper, me and the readers. And there's a way to forward or send that to me so that I can download these and or forward them to the readers and then double check. I always check their work before I enter the grades that I don't do myself, and of course I grade a large portion of them myself. But in order to make sure that they get filed in a consistent way so that they don't get mixed up, because I have two different sections and students are going to send them, sometimes late, a little bit late, or otherwise not maybe if they don't send, is what I'm trying to say, in this consistent method of labeling your file the same way for all my classes, so that they can be easily identified as to where those papers came from and where the grades go into that class roster. This is how you should do that. I actually made a mistake. I'm going to tell you right now. I mean, I've never claimed to be by any means infallible. Certainly, those who've been watching my lectures know there are glitches. We had a few last night, but I think I solved them, I hope so, about switching back and forth between the slides from the syllabus and my own slides, but that's near the end anyway. So for now, if you want to take a screenshot, this would be good. Otherwise, you should make a note. I think what I sent you guys as an email said R2.1 midterm. My mind was on autopilot when I sent that. That's what my reader said is the right format that every other instructor she has graded for, and she's done a lot of grading for other classes. has always used when midterms are due. But this isn't your midterm, of course. It's not for 3 weeks. So in other words, it should be written this way. Art 2.1 short paper number 1. You need to label it that way so we know which paper you're submitting, because some people will delay sending in their first paper and then send both in at the same time, what have you. It's important to keep the number in that title, in that label. And then underline last name, period, first name. Okay, just like this. I will resend an email with that updated or corrected version of the label technique to everybody tomorrow. Okay, I didn't have a chance today. Been doing a lot of other stuff to get ready for tonight. Okay, my internet connection was down for half an hour. I was really worried I wouldn't be able to see you guys, but obviously that worked out. So, okay, I'm just holding it up for another 30 seconds. Let me make sure that it's, yeah, it's where you can read. Oops, I don't know if I was doing that before. So you can see it. I have to look up over it. There we go. See, the last name and first name are a critical factor, but they won't help us if we don't know which class you're in. That's why you need to write R2.1 and what it is short paper number 1. And then they'll go into the right file and I can enter them in the robo correctly for your grades. Okay. All right. Enough with that. Any questions at this point now about your papers? Anybody? Now's a good time. Of course, I also, as I always have been, at the end of each lecture, I'll stick around after the slides are done. And for those who want to ask questions, you can do so at that time.
I have a
Yes,
question.
please, go ahead.
Yeah, so if we wanted to go through you before we officially submit it to check to see if something sounds okay, do you want sections rather than a whole thing?
Yeah, thank you. Excellent way to put it. Yeah, when you're sending your own paper for me to preview, just say your name and section. Yes, yes, that'd be perfect. And at this point, I will commit to this. I'll check every day except Saturday. I think I mentioned that's family day for me. And so 6 days out of the week, I do check my email, usually in the afternoon. I'm up late in the evenings doing all kinds of stuff. Believe it or not, the publisher of Sarah Gill's book that you all have, you should have by now, The Critic Sees, and you should be reading it because it'll help you write your papers. It's excellent. It's well written. I don't get a commission on promoting it, but I do require it. And I'm not the only teacher that does it. Well, I don't know about this college, but there are several at Sonoma State that do. And for instance, other colleges I've taught at, they contacted me and they wanted to know if that book works well and I'm going to continue using it. And I can tell you I am. So if you know anybody who's going to take an art history class from me in the future, and I'm not retiring anytime soon, can't afford to, you guys can hang on to the book and either loan it or sell it or whatever, exchange for another book. But I think keeping it for future reference, if any of you plan to take another art history class, it's quite useful. In any case, so yes, you can submit your draft. We'll call it draft. In fact, say it that way. So I know you're not submitting your paper for final grade early. Say, just, one line in an email tagline that'll just say, or even on the, heading or topic line that I'll see when I first see your email in my inbox. Remember to send it to markw@aol.com. That I know I put into the email when I send it out as an the cover sheet, as an attachment. Because it's just easier to navigate for me for that website to get.
So it's okay to send you the whole paper as a preview rather than you
Yes.
want to.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Whatever portion of it you think you need feedback on, as long as, like I said, you don't wait till 24 hours before it's due.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Right. Get it to me
Cool.
48 hours before. That'll work. Okay. That was an important question. Any others at the moment? I know some of you will think of things as perhaps even before we finish up tonight. And like I said, I will be sticking around after the last slide, but we should be at the end around between 9:30 and 9:40 tonight, depending on how many questions there are during the slides. And I'm going to do this. Hopefully the glitches we encountered last night, I had an entire file, my entire set of slides for every class I ever taught, all the years I've been teaching at this college, disappear on me at the end of the lecture last night. And it took my wife and me about half an hour to find out it had gone to a different, I call it a rat hole, internet, place than it was supposed to be. And it was hard to find it, but we did. So the slides are here. We will see them. All right. One more time. Any questions at the moment that people have right now about your paper?
I do.
Sure. Go ahead.
I was wondering about people who have pass no pass. How is this graded? Like,
Oh,
is
yeah.
it still percentage like thing, or is
Mhm.
it just on the
Yeah,
pass no pass?
it's points towards each of the four components. It's a good question. I think I very briefly touched on it the first night in class, but not since. So if you're taking a pass, not pass, or credit, non-credit, they keep changing that designation. Whatever it is the college says, it's the standard is 70%. That's actually in my course grading policy handout that I sent out the first week. You could take a look at it, but you don't need to now if you just want to remember it, what I'm saying. Yeah, that means you'd have to get in essence, well, a C minus, 70%, right? A minimum of a low C on all four assignments, or you might end up not doing as well on one of them, and then you can get extra credit. Remember, you can get up to 50 points extra credit. That can raise your letter grade a whole grade. So in other words, out of 100 points possible in the paper, you should be getting at least 70. And I can tell you right now that usually isn't a problem for students. If they follow the instructions, very few students get less than a C on their paper. Sometimes on the first paper, if they rush, don't wait till the last 2 days to start working on it. You should already have picked the topic. I'm telling you now, if you haven't, you need to get busy if you want an A or even a B. But to pass, to get a credit units, you just need above 70% of the total. So that's 280 points out of all the possible points. Remember how the grading is divided into four components, right? I always have to do it this way. Yeah, there we go. Four components, which is 2 papers and 2 exams, all equally weighted. And so you could have a bad test day. It's kind of hard with a take-home test, but maybe you don't, do well on one of the 2 tests, or you do wait to the last minute on your first or second paper and don't do as well as you're capable of. You can recover pretty easily with the extra credit if you take the initiative to do it and get all 50 points. Nobody's come close. I think I've had 2 people do 5 points each. One person do 10. So extra credit is still out there as an option. But yes, it's 70% of the total points, i.e. 280 at the end of this semester. And I will always tell you within or the same day I see your emails, how many points you have at any given time if you email me. You don't want to ask that right live and have everyone hear the answer. So you should do that if you have an inquiry about your points and your grade at any point during the semester. Just email me. Okay. Any other questions about anything? Extra credit, for example? Well, we have a bit to cover, and then next week the papers are due. So I will probably wait till after the first paper is turned in. By the way, next, when I planned this course weeks or even months ago and set the deadlines based on the calendar, the academic calendar, I didn't know, or I didn't think to look, that the first presidential debate might be of interest. I know. I'm going to record it. I'm following this. I'm not going to give you any partisan, that's not appropriate perspective. That's up to each of you to decide what you feel or don't about the election. But if you care at all, of course, that's kind of an important event. So hopefully you guys can still be here live while we have our lecture and then watch the recorded version afterwards. Okay. Anyway, just a program note for next week. All right. Now, tonight, here's the background. Any more questions? Now, still, again, at the end, you have another opportunity to ask live questions. All right, so I'm holding this next thing up so that you can all see the periods that we're going to cover in this class. There we go, which are the 3 eras, I guess you could say, 3 eras or periods of ancient Greek art. Archaic, which is the earliest period, and some of you may know that word. It's when I was in even college, it was a pejorative. I've heard a few people use it even recently. How archaic, right? Well, we're not talking about people's style of dress or music or whatever. We're talking here about a period of history. So it's about a 300-year period. You see, I put the dates, 800 to 500 roughly. These aren't exact dates, but approximately. For about 3 centuries, the Greeks, you'll see at the beginning of the very first slide tonight, were in the archaic period, so their art wasn't as sophisticated, as realistic, or as as developed, I will say, as skilled. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. As it later got to be in the second period of ancient Greek art, the classical era. That's when most of the famous works if you've ever seen any of the buildings, like the temples, right, the sculpture, maybe some of the Greek face painting, reached their zenith of skill, the artist did, in the classical era, roughly about 150 years. And then they had a civil war between the Greek city-states, and in came the Macedonians under Alexander the Great's father. Actually, he's the one that conquered Greece. So he wasn't even Greek, but his son grew up basically Greek. And we'll talk about Alexander the Great tonight. And that period when he conquered Greece, Alexander's father, and Alexander went on to conquer the entire known world. Again, you have to say Western world. 3 continents, one man, unique. Nobody else in history's ever done that. But he only lasted 10 years before he died in battle. But his empire lasted for 150 years, or about 200 years, actually. There we go. So that's the Hellenistic period. I will restate these terms, but I don't want to have to spell them for you. You don't have to know how to spell them on the exam, by the way. But here they are for you. So if everyone takes a screenshot, I'll hold another 30 seconds, and we'll get started with the lecture. Or 20 seconds. Okay, so tonight's topics are archaic, classical, and Hellenistic Greek art, and we're going to see all 3 mediums that they had at that time in the ancient world: painting, vase painting, sculpture, and architecture. Okay, so let us now do this, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It worked when I was doing the practice run. So we're going to do the screen share, and I'm praying that you can see it. If not, I'll have to just redo it. It took about a minute and a half last night to get. So let's do this. Maximize. Okay, so now I need to ask if you guys can see this first slide on your screen. Anybody?
Yeah, we can see it. Well,
Good. Yay. We're off to a good start. Because that
works.
one time in the last 4 lectures, not one of your 2 classes, somehow it was always the Tuesday class that had those issues. I had to go all the way back and reboot up the file. Took about 2 minutes. Okay, here we go. Here's the first must know. Remember, anything I say is a must. Well, by now you know this. A must know means you could be on the exam, but I'm not saying for sure, except a few, I think 3 out of the 8 slides tonight, I will tell you when we get to them. Okay, this one I'm not cutting from the study list. That gives you a clue. Those are very likely to appear, or they have a high possibility of appearing on the midterm. But of course, the midterm is an open book test. But you do still have to study and, focus when you take it, right? Okay, so here we go. The first slide, or must know for tonight's lecture, is Dipylon vase. I know that's a funny sounding name. Dipylon. Vase, of course, is V-A-S-E. The date is 750 BC, though some historians put it back as far as 800. We'll go with Stocksted's date. However, it's my bad that I keep overlooking this when I revise my syllabus. It's one of the few things that I must have a blind spot about. I forgot to write the location. Sorry, folks, but it's easy for you to do that with your pen now. Or if you're taking notes, you don't have to go back to your syllabus, or you could do both. For future reference. I should have written Athens. The location was the city of Athens, which by this time was a major city and the wealthiest and soon to become the most powerful city in all of ancient Greece. So again, it's Dipylon vase, location is Athens, and the date 750 BC or BCE. So what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at the kind of vase that's called a Dipylon vase. That's where the name comes from. It's not just this one vase that's called a Dipylon vase. It's the shape of it. So here's how we can start. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that yet. We're going to do that in a moment. But just so you can see the reason it's called a Dipylon vase, the first fact about the meaning is Dipylon vase is about a 2 foot tall vase, 2 to 2.5 feet. Not exactly the same height, but they're in that range, with a large open, right, top, you see that, and 2 handles, 1 on each side, which was used for carrying either liquids, large quantities, of course. I don't have to say that, right? I mean, obviously you fit a lot of liquid in here, which was used for carrying liquids or dry goods. Dry goods could be anything. It could be salt, it could be seasonings, could be wheat or grain, whatever it is that a person wants to move or transport. Usually we're talking about people who had enough money to hire, cooks in their kitchen. So we're talking about upper middle and upper class, families who could afford to pay an artist to paint their dipylon. Of course, they had dipylons that weren't painted, and they were probably pretty cheap at the local Target or whatever, the local shop that they would go to. Of course, these were made by the thousands in every city, but the ones with painting on them tell a story. That's the main focus we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, is what is going on the top or on the outside. There are two levels, or two sections, I should say. So let's go up close to it and take a look at the top level. This is the funeral, okay, the funeral of Achilles. And if you don't know who he was, well, I probably could have written his name too, but most of you have probably have heard of him, right? The greatest of all the heroes, or the most famous Greek warrior during the Trojan War. So another way to write it in a single sentence to start with this part of the meaning is, this scene, or this top, section, depicts a scene from the Trojan War in which Achilles, the Greeks' greatest warrior, had just died. So it's his funeral. It's showing his funeral. There's his body. Kind of awkward looking, isn't it? This is archaic. That's part of the meaning, by the way. I probably should start with that. This piece is early enough that it's not very skilled. It is, some people call it naive or unsophisticated. It is definitely the earliest period of Greek vase painting, when human figures weren't shown very realistically. Look at these stick figures. My daughter could draw better than that when she was in first grade. And she commented on that once when she came to one of my classes and saw this slide. And then here we have dogs. I mean, odd looking, aren't they? Yeah, but they're supposed to be the pet dogs of the late, great Achilles. Now, if you don't know who Achilles was, you might want to write this. It could be part of the meaning if this is on the midterm. I'm not saying it will be. Some of you know this, right? But if you don't, you should make note of it. Achilles was a hero, and I already told you a couple of lectures back, but if you didn't see that lecture, or you forgot, again, you might want to write this. A hero was half god and half human. He or she, could be a man or a woman, was the offspring of a god mating with a human being down on earth. The gods would come down and mess around with humans that way. In ancient Greek mythology, they believed that. So their offspring was half human and half divine, or half human and half god. That the phrase for that is a hero. It's a very specific meaning, different than we think of the word hero today. And so Achilles was a hero. But what does that mean? That means he was superhuman. He had superhuman strength, and he was almost, but not quite, invincible. Or invulnerable is the word that actually should be the right word, but that's a longer, harder word to spell. So just write it the way it sounds, either invincible or invulnerable from harm. So that, of course, made him, literally unable to be killed in battle, except, and then most of you who know who he was know the story. If you don't, again, write this. One part of his body was vulnerable, was subject to wounds, and that was his heel, because his mother had dipped him in a magic stream when he, was a newborn baby, sort of like a, impromptu baptism, I guess, by one heel. And that was, I think it was his right heel, doesn't matter which, but I think it was his right heel. So that's the only place that wasn't protected from harm. So guess what? The Trojans figured that out during the Trojan War, and one of their great warriors, I forget who it was, from the walls of Troy, I think it was the Prince of Troy, no, it was Hector, I believe, yeah. Their greatest warrior figured out somehow, I don't know, he asked the gods or somebody told him, guess what, you can kill Achilles if you shoot him in the heel while he's driving his chariot past the city. And especially if he had a poison arrow. So that's, I think, what they did. So he died, and the Greeks mourned him, and that's what this scene depicts. These are mourners, and you might ask, why do they have squares behind them? That's not at all what's happening. It's supposed to be the Greek mourning ritual. Now, this is such detail you don't need to write it unless you want to. If you would write a paper about this or do extra credits, you might want to know this detail. Greeks in small towns in rural parts of Greece, I've been to a Greek funeral. It was in the 80s, but I'm pretty sure they're still doing it now. would still sometimes do this ritual. They march or walk, almost like slow march, around the coffin, or in this case, the funeral pyre. That's Pyre if you want to spell it, but however it sounds is fine, where they actually cremated the recently deceased corpse. So that's the corpse of Achilles about to be cremated by his fellow warriors, and they're mourning him by placing their arms above their head. And I don't remember if you guys can see a small thumbnail of my face and head at this time, but if you can, I'll do this. But I'm not going to do the walk. When I'm in my classroom and live teaching setting, I will do it. But anyway, they march around the funeral pyre, or before, of course, the fire is lit, or before the the coffin is buried, and sometimes for hours, but at least for a long time, they make a sound. I have to be careful or I'll wreck my vocal cords. Like that, over and over, louder than I'm doing now. And if you get a room full of people, dozens of them doing this, let alone hundreds of warriors, of course, on a battlefield, that sound would carry. So the Trojans could hear them mourning their warrior. So that's the story. If you want to summarize and just say, it is the scene from the Trojan Wars in which Achilles, the greatest of all the Greek warriors, had just been killed, and he was being mourned by his fellow soldiers in a mourning ritual. Okay. Now down here, it's much simpler and easier to describe. This is an attack. This is after the funeral. Maybe the funeral sometimes lasted for days, and might be followed by sort of a good Irish tradition. I'm part Irish, right? A wake, where you might celebrate the person's life, a memorial, whatever, with plenty of beer or whatever they drank. But anyway, after the funeral was over, the point is where the bottom of the two levels is. This scene is a battle scene. It's the Greek soldiers trying to avenge the death, the killing of their hero by attacking the city walls with renewed anger or vigor, however you want to put it that way, energy. They tried and almost succeeded in breaking down the walls, but they couldn't. As you may know, you don't have to write this, that the final chapter in that war was the large wooden horse that the Trojans, of course, are famous for having hidden. I'm sorry, the Greeks are famous for having hidden all their warriors in, and they came out at night when the Trojans foolishly accepted the horse as a parting gift from the supposedly defeated Greeks. It's a famous, famous story. So this is just before that. This is the last big battle in which the Greeks tried to take the city by a storm, right? And that's what you're seeing here. These are supposed to be soldiers. Look at this, with shields in front of them. Well, these look like half-eaten apple cores to me. I mean, that doesn't look realistic. And look at the horses. This is what I'm talking about when I say that this is, see, we used to say the word primitive, but that's not PC anymore, so we don't. You could just say untrained or naive, or even folk art if you want. This guy wasn't trained as an artist. He did his best, maybe even had his, assistants help him or something, whoever the workshop person who owned the workshop was. But he didn't worry about getting realistic detail. Look at these spaghetti legs of these horses and their skinny heads. It's supposed to be 3 horses side by side. So it's really not accurate or authentic, or the better word is, I'm sorry, I meant to say realistic or accurate depiction of any living creatures, or even for that matter of the shields that the soldiers are carrying. They didn't carry shields that look like that. So they're just rather, some people might even say amateurish, but that's probably too strong a word. These are not skilled artist renderings here. These are archaic. Okay, that's the whole meaning. So now let's do a formal analysis. Okay, it's a warm background color, and it looks almost orange, doesn't it? And so if you said orangish yellow, that'd be all right. It really originally was a kind of a deep reddish orange, and it's faded. This is in a museum in Athens. I've seen it. So it probably was originally a darker, deeper reddish orange, but now you could just say a warm earth tone, a yellowish red. Except for the figures, they are black paint or silhouetted. So they're neutral, of course, as is the base or some parts of the base. All right, and then it's balanced. Well, yes and no. Of course, it's symmetrical left to right, as all vases have to be or they'd fall over. But it's not balanced, obviously, toward the bottom. It's weighted toward the top. Okay, and then the rhythm is very strong here with the geometric decorations above and below the two scenes, plus the human and animal figures, horses, dogs, what have you. All the objects repeat, even the shield. So there's lots of rhythm. It is almost entirely stable. Look carefully. If that doesn't seem obvious, I'll do another close-up. Whoops. There we go. I mean, the figures are upright. And even the funeral pyre and Achilles' body is laid out straight horizontal, even though it's kind of an awkward pose for him. And then the only thing's dynamic are the shields. Even the horses look mostly upright. So most of the objects here or figures are stable with only a couple of minor details. There is no modeling, none. It may seem like there is, but there's just a little bit of faded ink here. That's what that is. I should say faded. I meant to say cross hatch. You see that there? But that doesn't form solid shadows. So there really isn't any modeling. Okay. And there is no simulated texture, not that I can see. These are just silhouettes, outlines of human figures and objects. So no simulated texture, no modeling. Line is mostly bold, isn't it, on the figures that have an outline. These silhouettes don't have an outline, but you can see that around, well, a couple of the shields and Achilles. But most of this is done with solid lines with no real outlines, but those few outlines you do see are bold. Okay, and then we have a single mass. Yeah, the only technique for space, well, there's two parts to this. It's the real space of a 2 foot tall real object, right? Hollow inside, about 2 feet. It might be 2.5. It's somewhere in between 2 to 2.5 feet of real height or space, but it also has simulated, I'm all right. Overlapping is the only, it's probably obvious by now. Hopefully when we get to this level of the 5th week, it becomes, sixth week, it becomes clear how some of these techniques work when you just start looking at a work of art, so that you're using those skills on your papers by now, or will be between now and next Wednesday. Okay, so a lot of these things are self-evident, but I will do all the elements when time permits on each slide for formal analysis, as you are required for an A on your papers to do all 9 elements. Let's see, am I overlooking anything? Texture, for space, yeah, I just said that, overlapping. I think that's, yeah, about it. Okay, let's move to the next one. Okay, now we take a jump forward into the early classical era. And when I tell you the date, some of you may think back to just a couple minutes ago when I held up that piece of paper and say, wait a minute, this doesn't fit the time frame you gave us. I'll explain why. For classical. Okay, this is a very important work of art. I'm giving a heads up now. I always try to remember that. This is not going to get cut from the study list for the midterm. It's too important. It's a very seminal work of art. Now, that's a word I don't think I've used. I use it more in the Renaissance and even more so in the modern, 19th and 20th century painting and sculpture and architecture, because it happens more often as we move toward the present. In the history of art, certain artists were ahead of their time. That's what we're looking at. An artist who was like 30, 40 years ahead of other vase painters. That's why this piece is so important and why it won't be cut from the study list. Okay, so the title of this is Dionysus in a Boat. That's Dionysus. Dionysus in a Boat. And the artist, we know his name, so that's why if it's on the exam, you won't get credit if you put the location, which by the way was Athens. But that's not what's on the syllabus. It's the art. When we know the artist's name, you only need to know his last or her last name. So this is Ezekias. We know who he was. I'll explain in a minute. And that's spelled Exekias. And the date is 540 BC. Well, start with the fact that I just said it's ahead of its time. So how do we say that in a sentence for the starting of the meaning portion of your notes? It'd be easiest to write it like this. Ezekias is considered, or you could say is considered by many historians to be the first classical style Greek vase painter. You don't even have to say vase painter, because that's all. They didn't paint on canvas, they didn't have museums and castles with walls to cover. So what we just say painter. I'll say it again. Ezekias is considered by many historians to be the first, you could say great, famous or great classical Greek painter. He was ahead of his times. The other way, you should definitely put that in your notes, a good generation or more, because most classical painting in most parts of Greece, even in the city of Athens, which was the most advanced city in terms of wealth, power, and their artists were ahead of the rest of Greece. Even in Athens, most painters at this time, 540, that far back, were still doing archaic paintings, but he wasn't. So that makes him the first great classical painter that we know of, or famous one. Okay, why do we say that? Well, let's look at the scene, and I think you can see before we do the formal analysis, because that, of course, explains part of the reason we call this a classical Greek painting and not archaic, is the skill of the techniques. But that's more for the formal analysis. So just at a glance, just you should already have noticed, this piece doesn't look as childish, or it certainly doesn't look stick figure-ish as that last vase. You see some actual shapes and somewhat recognizable details on all of the objects here. So we'll get to how to analyze that after the rest of the meaning. Okay, so what the meaning is, though, is a scene. This depicts a scene from Greek mythology in which the god Dionysus, who is the Greek god of wine, and some would say partying, or you could say celebration, or debauchery is how they said it in the Renaissance. They thought he was not a positive figure, but people did celebrate. There's still people do still today. I've been to frat houses where I knew someone. I never was in one, but I used to know a few guys at Berkeley who would invite me to see something, just walk by and then say, no, not for me. And they'd be celebrating. Bacchus is the Roman name for the same guy, if you're curious. Now, some of you have heard more of Bacchus's name than Dionysus. Same god, same exact role and powers, which were that he invented and therefore is the god of wine. So I'll summarize it this way. This scene depicts an event in Greek mythology in which Dionysus, there he is, he's the guy on the boat, came down to earth and disguised himself as a normal human. All Greek gods, the main ones, just say the most powerful ones, were 50 feet tall, male or female. So he would have been 50 feet tall, and everyone would have known he was a god. So he disguised himself as a normal height human, man. And he was kidnapped by pirates. That's what you see here, the aftermath of that kidnapping. So what happened was he warned the pirates who he was, and they laughed. They didn't believe him. Oh, sure, you're a god. So he went ahead and turned himself into a 50-foot long man, which left no room for the pirates on their own ship, thereby knocking them into the water, and they would have drowned. But get this. This is one of two origins that this scene depicts. Two different things that were created by Dionysus in this one, scene. Dolphins, those are dolphins. In other words, those are the pirates turned into dolphins so they wouldn't drown, out of an act of mercy, you could call it, by Dionysus. He didn't want to see them drown, so he gave them a break in turn. So suppose the Greeks told their children, at least, I don't know if they believed it, the adults, but that's how dolphins were created. Who knew dolphins were ancestors of dolphins were pirates? But anyway, that's what the Greeks believed. The other is the origin of wine, which happened shortly after that, in which the hot Greek summer sun beat down on grapevines. Now, how did they get there? He was thirsty. So he created grapevines from, the mast of the boat. And those grape bunches fermented in the hot sun, thereby turning into wine. He squeezed them, he drank it, he said, "This is good. I have created something new. I'm the new god of wine." He didn't say that literally, but that's how he got to be known as the god of wine. So one more time to summarize this briefly, it depicts two origin myths, like every country has about their own early history, right? And here for the Greeks, they believe that Dionysus came down disguised as a man, turned himself into his full height, thereby pushing all of the pirates who kidnapped him into the water. Then he took mercy on them, turned them into dolphins, turned the mast into grapevines, and the grapes fermented in the sun, thereby creating wine. Okay, so that's almost all the meaning, except for the fact that if you didn't already write it, you should say this is much more skilled than archaic or earlier Greek art. So now we're going to talk about why. So let's do a little closer up view. There he is in the boat, and you can see all his muscles and the details on his beard and his hair here, and he's wearing some kind of crown, like a lot of gods wore some kind of headdress. But this is the part you don't have to write this. What is that? Nobody knows. I saw this piece. It's in the Athens Museum. I talked to a curator about it. I had some Greek friends with me who could translate when I was in Greece. Anyway, so what is this? Well, the most common explanation, you could write this or not, it's a minor detail, but I find it interesting, is that those are his legs wrapped in a blanket with stars as a decorative pattern, or he's wearing star pattern pajama bottoms. I think the latter is less likely. Anyway, somehow his legs are stretched out across and then his feet would reach, all the way here. So you can see why there wasn't any room for the pirates on the deck when he became his full size. So just say it's him stretched out across the deck with all the details of his muscles and his hair and you could say covering a blanket or whatever on his legs. And the boat itself has, look at that detail. It's fantastically skilled. I mean, you see even the little carvings of wood on the deck railing and then on the prow. And then the dolphins have enough detail to identify each part of their bodies, and they're shaped realistically for dolphins. And then we have the grapevines and the grape bunches. So there is, let's do the formal elements now. Simulate texture, all three of those things I just mentioned, his body, the boat, well, four, the dolphins and the grape all have, or grapevines all have simulated texture. There's the rhythm, of course, of all kinds of repeated shapes, the dolphins, the grape bunches, the carvings on the boat deck, his body, lots of rhythm. It is almost entirely dynamic. If you look closely, that should be fairly clear at a glance. The only thing stable is the mast. Even the sail, of course, is curved. And the boat might not be that shape in the water. It could be a kind of odd shaped boat, that much of a curve, but it could have had a slightly curved hull. In any case, here it's curved. So everything except the mast is dynamic. The only technique for space is overlapping. That should be fairly obvious. The color here is what they call the red color or red style of Greek face painting, which starts during the early classical era. So what you see here is a warmer tone. Some people think it looks salmon. I've had students say that if they wrote about it on a test or on a paper. You could say pink, deep pink or reddish pink. You could say salmon, pinkish orange. That is okay, whatever you think of that color, but you do want to make sure you write that it's warm, as is all the other, all the other objects. They're all brown. The boat, him, his body, the dolphins, the grapes. The only thing cool is the sail of the boat. The largest mass is the boat, then the sail, and then him. Pretty straightforward there. There is line, bold outline on the dolphins and the boat, thin outline on his body. Pretty much straightforward. There is no modeling, none. Okay, and let's see, it's balanced. Yeah, this is balanced. Left to right, and I'd say top to bottom as well. Okay, any questions? All right, next must know. It's another view of it, but it isn't the same one. I checked on this. This is a copy done by a skilled artist who studied the original and other recently found artifacts from Greek temples or archaeological sites, burials and what have you. So I think you can tell, look how perfect it is. Some people used to think this was just a perfectly preserved copy that was stored or lost and, protected in an airtight pocket underneath the ground for thousands of years. I mean, that's possible, but from what I've been able to determine, it's just a more recent version of it. So you can see what it might have looked like when it was new and intact. That's just too perfect to be 2,500 years old. So that's why I showed you the first version. Okay, this is not a must know either. I just thought you'd find this thing. It's also Ezekias, and it's Ajax and Achilles, two of the greatest warriors who fought for the Greeks during the Trojan War. They're playing a board game. Some people think it's an early version of checkers. They had it that far back. I think chess came in later. I'm pretty sure that came in late Roman times or even later. But in any case, it's during a lull in the battle. And look how skilled this is. You don't have to write this, but just, let's see, I guess it doesn't want to do it. There it is. The detail on their robes, their armor, their face, their hair and beards, it's quite realistic. So he was the greatest of the early, or the first, sorry, I meant to say the first great or first famous classical Greek painter, for obvious reasons. Okay, this is the next must know. Now, you should all have out your terms to know, which of course give you definitions that you should fill in as I give them to you, which I'm going to do now. This is the first of 4 definitions for tonight, okay? And this one is kouros. That's K-O-U-R-U-S, kouros. What is a kouros? Okay, kouros, here we go. This is, you should be writing this because it's not in the same definition in the glossary of whichever textbook I guess you'd be looking at it, Stockstead. I try to give it either a simpler or a more clear-cut definition using more plain, clear language than textbooks usually do. At least some of my students have said they felt that. So anyway, the definition, it could come up on the fill-in section of the midterm, so you should always write those. All right, here we go. Kouros is a life-size statue of an ancient Greek male, usually a military or athletic victor, okay, comma, sorry, one more line. And sometimes, I would underline that word, not always, sometimes placed above that person's grave when they died. In other words, this is not a gravestone. When it was carved, the person was alive and young. This is what they looked like, supposedly, at least their physique did. And so these kinds of figures were used to honor someone or celebrate their victory in war or an Olympic contest like the Olympics or something by their family. Of course, it'd be commissioned not by the person himself. Only some political figures seem to like to do that, but mostly these people were celebrated by the whole town, the village, the city, wherever they lived. And so maybe the city itself, the government of that city or community, or the family members of their tribe, would pay an artist, a sculptor, to create a life-size image of them. Okay, that's part of the meaning. Everybody got that definition? I need to repeat it. Okay. So what do we see here? We see one, we don't know whether he's a military victor or he's not identified, but he's in the archaic style. That is an important part of the meaning, equally important to what he is, kouros. What does that mean? Well, when it comes to sculpture, it's different than with painting, because you might say to yourself, wait a minute, what's wrong with this? This sculpture is pretty realistic. It's true, it's got all the body parts in the right place, the proportions are realistic, and the details of the muscles, they're pretty realistic. Okay, but there is a, let's just say, less skilled aspect, and that's in the face, A, and the pose, B. So what makes this archaic? You can keep it simple in one sentence, 2 things. First, it has a unrealistic pose. The pose is stiff, formal, you could say ramrod, upright, whatever you want to say. People don't stand like that normally unless they're being punished, right? Or they're, being ordered to stand that way or something by a drill sergeant. That's not what's happening here. This guy's supposed to be celebrating a victory that his fellow citizens are honoring him for. So it's a stiff, formal pose going all the way back to the ancient Egyptians. All the early cultures, there's no one culture was better or worse than another. When it came to carving human figures, they always used the stiff, formal, and unrealistic pose. That's part of what makes it archaic. And the other part, wait a minute, you know what? I think maybe 1 or 2 of you might be, and you can speak up, you can holler and interrupt me. If I didn't give you the location and the date, I apologize. I'm doing it now. I didn't say this was so important. I might or might not cut it, but for now, assume it might be on the test. I spelled it, but I didn't say, I don't think. Athens, 525 BC. So during this period, most sculptors were still archaic in their limited use of realist detail. In what 2 areas? I already said the first, the poses they used. And then in the facial expression, there is no emotion here. Look at this guy's eyes. They're blank. He could be dead. they use the same exact facial features and expression on every face of almost every Kuros, at least in any given workshop they would use this. So they weren't portraits, realistic or accurate, and they did not depict any emotions, any normal human feelings or emotions. So that's the other part that makes this archaic. And if you look at his face, it's not realistic. The expression is just a generic version of a young man's face, looking straight ahead, but he's not even really looking. It looks like he's under hypnosis or something. So that's not very realistic. So that's what marks this as archaic. And that's how these things were done this far back. Okay, but now we want to say, was it placed above the person's grave? We don't know, but many of them were. However, I just want to emphasize this again, if it's on the exam or if the term, just the definition is in the fill-in of the word Kuros, they were not gravestones per se. In fact, most of them didn't end up on their graves. Well, I can't say that. I know there's no survey that I know of that was done of all these sculptures because most of them are long gone. But from what the records we have at the time, most of them stood in a town square or somewhere like that, you know, or the person's estate or the family compound of where their family lived at the time this person won that victory or that contest. So more often than not, they were monuments, memorials to the person's victory, starting with right after they won that battle or that athletic contest to celebrate it. Usually done, you know, weeks after that event, or certainly, you know, months, and then on display during that person's lifetime. And then at least just say often they were left in that spot, but sometimes they were taken away and put over the person's grave. Okay, so now let's do the formal analysis. It is balanced, absolutely, completely symmetrical, like intact human figures always are, top to bottom, left to right. It is a single mass. The base is new. So when it was carved, it may have had its own base. It almost certainly had to, but we don't have that now. This is the museum's modern base. So there is no second or third mass. It's one single 6 foot tall figure. So for space and mass, they overlap in this case. A single mass, 6 feet tall, and a real depiction of an object in real space, life-size adult man. And it is, by the way, 6 feet tall. I've seen this sculpture. That's very unusual. Back then, not many males were that tall in ancient cultures, anywhere, not just Greece. The average adult height was about 5'6". A male, I should say, height was 5'6". And average female height was about 5'1". According to the bones we found, we have bones from, of course, many of these generations worth of the cultures that we're talking about here. So we don't have to guess. Okay, so he was taller than average. It might be one reason that he did well in whatever contest he was in. All right, and then we have, again, real space. You could make the case that his hair overlaps his head if you really want to stretch that, but you wouldn't have to go that far. It's just a real 6 foot tall object in real space. Then we have the cool color. Well, it is cool, although if you look down here, some of you probably started already thinking, if you're thinking ahead, about other elements of composition that we hadn't got to yet. Oh, isn't it partially warm and partially cool? Well, the whole thing was originally cool gray, I guarantee that. Now, that leads to a question I had last night, and every time I taught this course, at some point, people ask this when I show Greek sculpture. Were these ever painted? Were they always just the actual natural marble color? Because they're all marble. At least all the Greek sculpture I've ever seen is marble. Yes and no. Most of them were painted. From the research I've read, more recently, the evidence points to a majority, just say most, or a majority of Greek life-size adult figures, we'll say, were painted if they were wearing armor or clothing, and sometimes even if they were nude. Many Greek male sculptures are nude, as you know, if you've been seeing any of them. And we're going to see another one in the next slide that is much more accurate and realistic and not archaic. And so almost every piece of sculpture you can see photos of, and textbooks are on the web, show, whoops, hang on. Thank you. It gave me a warning, which just fell out. Just give me a second. I'm just replugging it in so that doesn't create a problem. Okay. All right. So to continue, to finish with this, what we have here is cool. All original, the piece was cool. And whether it had paint on it or not, we don't know. So you don't have to address that question. But if you want to look it up, you'll see that many of them had natural colors on the skin and the clothing. so forth. Okay, and then we have the rhythm. Well, yeah, of course, it's human bodies, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 hands, 2 feet. The hair creates rhythm. You can see he's wearing dreads, right? And that's all done with carved line, the face, the hair, the muscles. Very realistic simulated texture that archaic sculptors in Greece could do well. And there's no technique for modeling. It's just the lighting from the museum. And this is stable. The only thing dynamic is the top of his head, really. I mean, you could stretch it and say around the top of his hips, I suppose, but he is standing rigid. That's the whole point. It's archaic. So naturally, by definition, any of those sculptures from that era are going to be rigid, straight up and down, ramrod stiff, however you want to say that. And of course, that would be a stable pose and overall make the whole piece stable. Okay, this next piece is one that I'm not going to cut, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's very important. It will have a high possibility to be on exam, but I almost forgot I had this extra slide I worked in between last semester. Now, this isn't a must know, the next one is, and then we'll take our break, okay? This is a female version of a Kouros, so you don't have to write this, but I just think it's interesting. We're just talking about the colors that might, well, here, you can see some of them. Let's get up closer. And of course, get this down. You can see she had painted, eyes and lips. Her hair was colored. She would have probably been, the sculptor was trying to emulate the henna. Yes, they use henna in ancient Greece, right? Henna for painting, faces and various body parts, of course, as well as sometimes in the hair, which is still done in lots of cultures around the world today, right? And so we also know her clothing had, again, you don't have to write it, this, had some residue of what the original colors were. We think it looks like bluish gray color on the geometric patterns of a dress. Yes, if you're curious, her hand is missing, or her whole forearm is missing. That's just due to damage from wherever it was buried and found like that. It's a 4'10" tall adult, full-size adult female figure called a Kore. Again, you don't have to write this. I just think it's worth a quick counterpoint to the Kouros, but I took it off the syllabus. So I think it's interesting. First of all, that you would think, well, that's awfully short. This must have been an unusually short woman. No, she was within the range of a normal adult female. The average adult females were between 4'10" and 5'2" at the, there were plenty of tall women, but they weren't the majority or a higher percentage, as high a percentage of the population as they are today in many parts of the world, including Greece. So she would have been considered a normal height. And she had color painted on her, and yet she has that archaic smile, they call it. And I like to call it the Prozac just kicked in. Look at her eyes. To me, she looks like she's in a trance. The 1,000-yard stare is how some people describe that look. A frozen smile is what an archaic smile is. It's another way of saying it. And that's what the Kouros had. And just to make sure that's clear, whoops, didn't mean to go that far that time. Yeah, I'm used to hitting things twice because that's what you have to do to get your files up. At least I do. If you look at his face, you can see the same frozen smile, archaic smile. So I don't know if I use that term for these notes on this must know, but if you didn't, you could add that at the end, because now we're about to go to the next must know. Okay. All right. So archaic smiles were used on both male and female figures in archaic period sculpture. But now we're jumping to a new era in sculpture style in ancient Greece. This is not archaic. This is a very important slide. And as I said, it's going to have a high possibility of being on the exam. And so we might spend a tad more time on this than the previous 3 slides because it is so influential. It was considered the first great piece of classical Greek sculpture by many historians. So here's the title, Spear Bearer. Spear Bearer. And of course, that's B-E-A-R-E-R, Spear Bearer. We have the artist's name, Polykleitos, P-O-L-Y-K-L-E-I-T-O-S, Polykleitos. It's one word. Now, I know Greek Last names, polysyllabic as they are, can be hard to pronounce, let alone spell. But of course, you guys have the advantage of having an open book test. By the way, I'm going to give you a heads up on that. I'm going to post the exams for and make the deadline by midnight of the day after they're on. So that's almost 24. It's a little over 24 hours. But I won't accept them after that deadline. Unless you have a medical emergency, which it's not my rule. The college has this rule. If you're taking something after a deadline or turning something in late, then you're supposed to show evidence of why you weren't able to turn that paper in or take that test at that time when everybody else did. Otherwise, there's no point in having deadlines and dates for exams. So you'll have until midnight the following day to turn in your answers. So that gives you plenty of time to look things up. But of course, it's best if you study, because then you'll be able to get it done and get it out of your hair and into me promptly enough that you can get your grade back sooner. Okay, so the test will be posted for just a little over 24 hours. I will give them in real time and advance the slides in real time. Then the whole thing will be recorded, and then I will post them on Amazon.
Can I ask a
Not
question?
on Amazon, I misspoke. I'm sorry, my head is swimming. I've been trying to help my daughter today with some of her work too before I even started preparing for this class. I meant YouTube, of course, that's where all my videos are. And that will be on there. But if someone turns in a test 2 or 3 days later, they have to show me evidence in writing. It's not my rule. It's a department rule, and I believe the entire JC, but certainly our department rule that has been in place since before I started teaching here, which is just some kind of written evidence of a medical emergency. And then you get an extension if you need one, but only then. Okay, so try to be on time for the test, but if you
Can I ask a
can't be,
question
you can
about that?
see it on YouTube. And I will send emails out to remind people of that. Which gives people a chance to look up the test. Now that means I'm going to post them the same night I give them, or certainly no later than the next morning. And then you have that whole next day. If you didn't already finish the test, you'll have an hour and a half, and you won't need that long. If you studied, you won't need it, but you can take the time to keep your answers overnight and then double check them. You have that option. So it's an open book test that's what I mean by that. If it isn't already obvious by definition with an online class like this. Does someone have a question? I thought I heard someone just a moment ago.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, when we go to take the test, is it all like based on I know it's based on the pieces you're going over, but like, is it all analyzing it, or is there multiple choice questions?
It's a combination of 3 things. And I want to compliment you, and it's not a matter of anything, specific or professional or personal, but I just really am glad to hear anyone in any college level class use the phrase based on. I'm so tired of hearing the phrase based off of. You can't base something off of something. It's a contradiction. That's an oxymoron. Thank you. That is the correct grammatical way to ask that question. I would have answered it either way, of course. All right, here we go. I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we're going to review 2 weeks from tonight, and then the test is 3 weeks. But I don't mind giving an early advance notice. It's going to have 3 parts. The first part will be slide identification. In other words, just exactly what was on the syllabus. And those slides will be on the screen for about 2 minutes. That'll be more than enough time if you know it. And if you don't, you can go back and look at it later when it's posted on YouTube. Okay, then the next will be the slide analysis, which will do 3 slides in which you write just a paragraph. I'll repeat all this and give you even a visual image on screen of how the test looked the night we study. And then we're going to cut the list of slides from the syllabus down, like I said, 40 to 50%, making it much less for you to even have to think about. But anyway, the point is that I'm giving you now an advanced brief summary since you asked. And that would mean that you can take your time and answer them in the real time, or you can start to answer them. If you don't finish, again, you can go back and look up the same slide on the YouTube video. And there'll be 3 of those. You do identify them, but that's only worth 3 points for those, facts from the syllabus, the same exact of whatever's on the syllabus. And then we have the third part, which is the definitions, where you fill in. Actually, it's true, false. I give a definition, and I either give the correct definition or slightly alter it. And I say, true or false. And there's only a few of those. I think it's 5, maybe 10. So it's 90% of the test is 45% is that's what it is. 45% of it, the first part, is on the identifications. Another 45% on the analysis. So they're equally weighted. So it's not all about memorization, but there is some. However, again, you don't really have to worry about that with this situation of open book tests we have. And then fill-in, so we're at 10%. So there's 100%. Okay, hopefully that answers your initial curiosity, okay? Any other quick question that, yeah, because we're doing pretty well on time. I think we'll take an earlier break. Last night I went all the way past this slide to the next one, the Parthenon, but I think my voice could use the break after this, but this one's going to take a few minutes. It's a pretty important piece. And like I said, there's a very, very high probability, I won't say 100% certainty, of it appearing on one or the other section, meaning either the slide analysis or the slide identification part of the midterm. Why? Why is it so important? Well, here's the title, okay? I already gave you that. Sorry, polykleidos, I meant to say, by the way, with polykleidos, if it helps when you're trying to take the test in real time because you've got jobs or kids at home or, you know, other obligations, you don't want to have to come back to it. Many of you will be able to do a fine job with just the real-time test as I give it on the night of the test on Zoom. But in any case, if you want to try and get it right the first time, I always break down, this is a tip I've given all my classes for years, Greek last names, to remember them, they're phonetic. If you pronounce them slowly by syllable, one syllable at a time, say them slowly phonetically, it's usually pretty easy to remember how to spell them. So poly, P-O-L-Y, of course, klei, right, K-L-I-E, right, tos, T-O-S, polykleitos. I don't know if that helps, but I used to use those devices when I was taking art history exams at UC Berkeley. Believe me, if you take a UC Berkeley, or not just UC, any four-year college, I've taught at Sonoma State and San Francisco State, in art history, if you take an art history class at a four-year university, it's going to be a lot more memorization and hundreds of slides to study, and it won't be open book. Well, I don't know what they're doing with the online versions now at UC, but in any case, much harder. I hated those exams, even though I love the subject matter. So you do have a little bit of a break on that in this class, or all my classes. Okay, again, polykleidos, 450 BC. Okay, so we know by the date that it's well into the, you know, the earlier part of classical. So here's how to write that on the meaning. This is a classical, famous, one of the most famous, just say it that way. It's one of the most famous classical Greek sculptures by the first famous, it's the only way to say it, by the first famous classical Greek sculptor, right? The artist, Polykleitos. Most historians also, as a second fact now, and this is the main fact about this to remember, because this is easily going to come up somehow. It'll come up on the exam, if nothing else, in the fill-in definition section. This is also considered, this sculpture and this sculptor, right, the statue and the artist, is considered often the first example, or you could say use, of the technique called contrapposto. Now, this definition can't be shortened. It's 3 full lines. There's no way to shorten it. So I will give it to you slowly and repeat it. But you see it on your list of definitions there, just below chorus. Okay, contrapposto. It's already spelled on you should have that from you, so I shouldn't need to stop. So it has 2 P's in the middle. Okay, contrapposto. I had one student say, is that a type of pasta served in Contra Costa County? Nope, not even spelled close. It's a, here it goes. The definition is a pose for sculpture invented in ancient Greece, comma, a pose for sculpture invented in ancient Greece, comma, in which, here we go, there are 3 features. So I would number them, make it easy to remember when you're reviewing. Number 1, the weight, I'm going to show with the arrow here, the cursor, the weight is on the back leg. I'd underline the word back leg, and the front leg is loose. Look, he's not putting any weight on the front leg. This leg's in front of that one, if it's not obvious. It's not left and right. There's nothing to do with it. So don't write that or make that mistake if it's on the exam and you write that, you'll get points off. It's, I'll say it again, the number 1 feature is the weight is on the back leg and the front leg is loose, okay? That's the first feature. Number 2, one arm is down, you see that? One arm is down and the other is raised, usually holding something. If you look carefully, you can see he's holding what looks like a spear, but really it isn't. It's a modern piece of metal because the spear disappeared a long time ago. Probably was wood, and so it rotted into nothing. You know, after thousands of years being buried, this piece was somewhere buried somewhere in Italy. We'll get to where it came from and who he is in a minute. Let's finish the definition, of course, of contrapposto. Number 3 is the spine forms a gentle S curve. Quite literally, that's how human beings really stand. This is the most realistic style or pose. Let's put it that well, style and pose for a sculpture ever invented by. No one's done anything more realistic than this. The Greeks invented it. No one had done it before them. So again, I'll repeat the definition once quickly, and then we'll go into the more aspects of the meaning and finish up with a formal analysis before we take our break in about 10 minutes, because there's a number of things to say. Okay, so once again, contrapposto is a pose for sculpture invented in ancient Greece in which, number 1, the weight is on the back leg and the front leg is loose. Number 2, one arm is down and the other is raised, usually holding something. And number 3, the spine forms a gentle S curve. All 3 are visible in any true contrapposto pose. There's another reason this is considered a classical era sculpture besides the pose, and that's his face. And so let's go take a look at that. He's got a realistic expression. This isn't the 1,000-yard Prozac just kicked in stare that we saw. That was just a generic, repeated, non-specific, right, version of a human being's face. This is an actual portrait of someone. He probably had just won an athletic contest. Could have even been an Olympics game in the Olympics. I'm sure they had spear tossing. Of course, they would have, of course, in the ancient Greek Olympics. Don't they in the modern Olympics too, I think? Anyway, the point is that you can see some emotion, an expression, if you want to call it that, realistic or lifelike. I like to say lifelike emotion or expression in the face. And the features are much more realistic or lifelike. And that's part of what makes this piece a classical era sculpture. Much more skilled and realistic. In fact, it's completely skilled and realistic. Every aspect of it evokes a realistic image of a human figure, you know, standing at ease or relaxing and contemplating his victory. He just won, or maybe he's looking at his competitor thinking, did I do better than him? Yeah, I'm going to get the, you know, gold medal or whatever. I don't know. You don't have to write that. The point is that you can see he's thinking about something. It's every detail is realistic and lifelike. And that's what Ezekias was famous for, being the first famous, at least, well-known Greek sculptor to use all that, you know, the realistic pose, the contrapposto, and the emotion in the face. Now, one more thing about the meaning. And I must confess, last night's class didn't get this because we were behind the curve. We were having much more problems with technology. I better knock on wood. It doesn't happen tonight. So we got, you know, a little behind the schedule where I need to be. So because we're not, I'm going to tell you one last thing about the meaning. You notice how perfect his physique is, and you may have noticed if you've seen a lot of nude Greek figures, male or female, but it's particularly noticeable with adult male nudes in Greek sculpture. Their physiques are perfect, absolutely perfect in terms of, you know, the musculature and, you know, they're fit, however you want to say that, you know, buff, I guess you could say that. Why? Because all the Greeks look like this? No, of course not. No cultures like that. But when this is the part you should write now, it's the last fact about the meaning on this slide. When a Greek sculpture depicted a perfect physique, it was a sign that the gods, the Greeks believed, of course, it's their religious belief, the Greeks believed that the gods favored that person. That's how they would have shown all their heroes, like Achilles and their other heroes, Hercules, right? And that's how they showed regular everyday human beings when they did a portrait like this. It's a portrait of someone who's done from real life, I'm sure. And so this would have been a sign that this man was favored by the gods, to win the contest he was in, or to survive, you know, and become victorious in any battle he engaged in, or just be lucky in life. They believe the gods favored some people and not others, was their explanation for, I guess, fate, some people would call it, why some people they thought maybe had, you know, better luck or better events in their life. more victories, what have you, more success. So I'll say it again, the perfect physiques on a Greek nude figure of an adult male or female, either one, it wasn't about the sex of the person, would indicate the fact the Greeks believed that the gods favored that person, and that's part of their religion, and it's clearly true here. Okay, formal analysis, and we'll take a break. It's balanced, oh, totally, standing upright, complete, intact human figure, of course, by definition, balanced left to right and top to bottom. The largest mass is him, and then I guess you could say the tree stump and then the spear, but the spear is not original, it's a replacement. So if you want to say the base, that is the original base. I actually use this base. So it's probably on display again, like in some, is this a Kouros? Yeah, you could say that. It would be a Kouros. Yeah, it's a kind of Kouros, much more realistic than the first one we saw tonight. Anyway, so he's an athletic victor, probably from a athletic contest. So if you want to break it down that way and think of the spear as not really part of the original, at least what's left, the original is long gone. Then it's three masses, of course, the largest his body. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. And then the tree stump, and then the base. Okay, it is mostly stable. He's standing upright. The base is stable, and even the tree trunk mostly stable. But there is a dynamic tilt to his spine by definition, plus his head's tilted to one side. So it's a little bit dynamic, but it's more stable, look carefully, in the overall pose than it is dynamic. But you could just say both, that's good enough. Okay, the simulated texture is going to be as good or better than it was on archaic sculpture, because look how detailed the face and the hair are, all the muscles. So that's all done with carved line. There is no modeling here. Again, when you see shadows on an object, whether it's sculpture or building, right? It's usually natural modeling. So you don't just, you could say there's no modeling, but you shouldn't just leave it that simplistically. If you're writing about this on the test or for a paper about a piece of sculpture, where the museum or if it's outdoors, the sun creates natural modeling, that's what you should say, that there is modeling from the sun, natural modeling from the sun, or artificial light from the museum creates the modeling. No, this is not a technique of the design the original artist was creating. That's a side effect, okay. And of course, there's no bold outline here, it's just carved line, right? And then we have, for space, there's actually two aspects. It's a real object in real space. He's also about 6 feet tall. I've seen this figure. Again, taller than the average. Of course, they would have perhaps favored, or maybe even just someone that tall would have had an edge in an athletic competition, perhaps. But in any case, many of the sculptors are that tall, even though very few Greek men were that tall, ancient Greek men. Okay, so we'll just say real space of about a 6 foot tall adult male figure with some overlapping, because what's left of his spear, we know he had one originally, obviously, indicates that it would have been a hands overlapping, or a hand, sorry, his left hand overlapping the spear, and his leg, right, overlapping, that would be his right leg, right? You don't have to say which, the tree trunk. So there's limited overlapping, but mostly it's real space. And then the color, that throws some people off. That's a cool gray color. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, at this point, we know that it all once was that color. So why is it discolored down here? It's buried for thousands of years. And actually, I should have mentioned in the meeting, you don't have to add this, but this is not the original. The original disappeared a long time ago. This is a Roman copy from about 100 BC. So what, 300 and some years later. But the Romans loved Greek art. They copied it. They emulated the Greek style in architecture and sculpture, although they've surpassed it. And we'll talk about the Romans next week. So just say it's a Roman copy of a Greek original. Keep it simple if you're going to add that to the notes on the meaning. Okay. And then we have the fact that the discoloration is new. So you just want to say originally it was a cool gray color. If you're curious about these, you'll have to write this. These lines here, this is cement holding the piece together, and so that it can, be reassembled. It was found in pieces under the ground and reassembled. And I think it was found during the Renaissance. I'm pretty sure Michelangelo saw this, or if not, at least other Renaissance artists did. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Yeah, I think that's it. So we're going to take our break now, 20-minute break. And I'm going to mute this. So you guys can go do whatever you need to do for the next 18, 19, 20 minutes. I'll be back in 20 minutes. All right. See you then. Okay, it's been exactly 20 minutes. So hopefully everyone's back to their laptop or computers. For this is one of those slides that I've said I will always give you a heads up, is really important. So it has about an equally high possibility as the last one we saw of the spear bearer of being on the midterm, either in the slide identification or slide analysis section. By the way, I did just think about this during the break. The student that asked me, they don't have to speak up unless they have a follow-up question. But for everyone's sake, it was an important question about the nature or type of questions on the exam. But I did kind of riff off that and tell you that it's going to be posted. It will be on YouTube, but there's no way I can do it the same night because I don't finish and close down till about, first of all, it has to convert. That takes an hour on your Zoom, and then to upload it to, some of you know this, a 3-hour lecture to YouTube is another couple. It's not going to be, I'm not going to sit there till midnight doing that. So it'll have to be the next day that I'll post it, but I'll keep it up till Friday, midnight on Friday. That's plenty of time for either class, either Tuesday or Wednesday, to still have at least 24 hours after the real test time is over to go back and look at the questions again. Okay, just as a clarification. And we'll talk more about the details of the test and how to study for it and how it's going to be graded on the week prior to the exam, which is 3 weeks and a night. So 2 weeks from now, we'll do a discussion on how to study for the exam. All right, this is the next must know, very important slide, not cutting it from the study list. Okay, this is Parthenon. We don't have to say the Parthenon. It's the only one building in all of the ancient world that was called that. Parthenon, P-A-R-T-H-E-N-O-N. The architects, sorry, long multisyllabic Greek last names. We know their names, so you wouldn't, if you put Athens, you wouldn't get credit for that part of your answer if it's on the midterm. Their names were Callicrates and Iktinos. Again, these aren't syllables, but I will spell them once each. Callicrates is K-A-L-L-I-K-R-A-T-E-S. And I would just say Calli and then Crates. That's how I do it, if that helps anybody to break it down into syllables. And then Iktinos is I-K-T-I-N-O-S. The date it was finished in architecture, when we show any architectural site, and what you need to remember, what's on the syllabus, the year, you can round to a 0, right, is the year that the structure was completed and opened or, available for use, whether it was a house or a public building. Well, what was this? This was the temple to Athena, and you can't overstate her importance to the ancient Greeks. Athens, the city of Athens, was dedicated to her. Whoops. Is this still, you know what? I didn't think to ask. Let me just double check. This should be, right? Everyone can see this?
Yeah, we can see it, but what was the date?
Yeah, 4/32. Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking, did I need to hit screen sharing? No, I didn't pause screen sharing, so it's okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, 4/32, but on the exam, you could just write 430. That would be acceptable. Okay, so what are we looking at here? We're looking at a temple to the Greek goddess Athena, and she, as some of you know, was the Greek goddess of wisdom and the patron goddess of Athens. That's why they named the city after her and why they built this temple in her honor. And so this is considered the most perfectly proportioned, there's your alliteration, perfectly proportioned classical. This is a classical Greek temple. They were making temples in the archaic times that were not as perfectly proportioned. So that's how to write it, that this is considered the most perfectly proportioned classical Greek temple ever built during ancient Greek times, or in ancient Greece, you could just say it that way. Why? We'll get to why in a minute, but let's talk about what the building was used for. Well, there was a statue in the back of Athena, and it was 50 feet tall. Remember, we said before the break that all Greek gods, they believed that their gods were all 50 feet tall, at least the major gods. She was a major goddess, of course. And so a statue of her of gold and ivory, if you can imagine that. The statue itself was ivory, and that's a lot of ivory, but at least that's what historians have said. And maybe there was stone under her armor, but her face and hands and exposed skin was ivory, and her armor was gold. Golden shield, golden helmet, golden breastplate. Pretty impressive. And it stood at the back of the temple. So people would come here to worship her, to say prayers or ask favors from her, and hope that she would somehow give them an answer. So this was the most important temple in all of Athens, which itself was the most important ancient Greek city, as everyone must know by now. It was the most, again, if you want to write this, Athens itself, the city, was the most powerful and wealthiest and advanced artistically, or you could say culturally advanced, of all the ancient Greek city-states. And so Greeks were allowed to come from all other parts of Greece, not just Athens, to worship Athena here. She was, remember, a common goddess throughout ancient Greece. Okay, so that's part of the meaning, but why do we say it was the most perfectly proportioned ancient Greek temple, period, really, you could say, or certainly of all classical style temples? Because the architects figured out a system, and I used to write this down as a new definition. That would make it 5 definitions. I try to keep it to 4 or less for each lecture that you have to write and later remember. So it isn't the definition I'm going to give you as a written definition, but I'm going to describe what it was. It's a system of measurements that the architects used to place the columns, as part of the meaning, you should be writing this in your own words, place the columns at different distances from each other on either side. That means that they're not evenly spaced. That's a short way of saying it. The columns are not evenly spaced. Why? Because the human eye sees them as evenly spaced. It's a brilliant breakthrough, which has been used ever since on every kind of classical building, including the buildings in Washington, D.C., right, that use this style, like the Capitol building. I'm not sure about the White House, probably. It's not big enough to need, but large public buildings. So the Supreme Court, where there's so many, people bringing memorials to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that's been in the news for days now. You've seen that on the news probably, right? That building is classical Greek style, exactly the same style. And the columns of any classical Greek style building, but this is the first one to do it, this technique, it's called enstasis. Some of you may know that term, but you don't have to write it. You can just say a mathematical formula was invented for this building, which has been used ever since for Greek style buildings, classical Greek style buildings, which is to place the columns at differing widths or distances from each other so that they appear to be evenly spaced. Don't they look evenly spaced? They do when you stand. I've stood in front of it. You'll see my slides of it at the end of this evening, of both Athens and Olympus, or Delphi. It's actually Delphi. Olympus is the mountain behind Delphi, where they believe the Greek gods lived. So anyway, in Athens, if you ever go there, anybody here been to Greece? I think I usually ask that to start. Anyway, okay, well, if you go, you won't get very much closer than, maybe a little closer than this photographer did, because you used to be able to walk right up to the stairs, and then there was a rope between or in front of the columns. You can't even get that close now. They're restoring somewhat. Some think they may finish completely rebuilding it. So why is it in ruins? That's another part of the meaning. Because the Turks, when they ruled the entire Eastern Mediterranean, they ruled a huge empire. We'll talk about the Turks later. The Turks conquered Greece and held, occupied Greece for hundreds of years. And during that time, about 300 years ago, you keep it simple, it was in the early 1700s. The Greek army had stored gunpowder. Can you believe that? That's what a massive disrespect for the local culture. The most important building, they stored gunpowder. And guess what? It exploded one night. There's a couple theories. One is that it was in a battle of some kind, and another says it was just an accident. It doesn't matter that much detail. Just say that there, there had been gunpowder stored here by the Greek army that occupied Athens at that time, well, all of Greece. and it exploded one night and blew the entire roof off and about a third of the columns down. That's what you see rubble around is partly from that explosion. The other reason you see rubble is from the Persian invasions. I don't know if you saw the movie 300. And then when I was a kid growing up, they had the more realistic version of that battle called the 300 Spartans. Same idea, same event, fairly accurate in both films, slightly different special effects. One was in the 60s and one was, the most recent was like 2014 or something. Anyway, the point is that both versions of that battle depict how the Persians were the most powerful empire in the Middle East, and they attacked Greece 3 times. That was just one of the times they attacked the Greeks. The Greeks fought them off, but they got to Athens one of those times, and they laid waste to the city. And so they damaged the temple. In fact, it was another temple. They had to rebuild this, and that's the one we see now, obviously. So there was a previous temple to Athena on this site, and this rubble is from the invasion. Lot of it. Some of it's from the explosion from the Turkish gunpowder, and even more than that. Most of it is actually thousands of years ago when the Persians invaded around 500, or was it 4? Yeah, about 480 BC. Anyway, just decades before this temple was completed, they destroyed the previous temple. Okay, that's almost enough for the meaning, except for the 2 last definitions. And now you'll be glad to hear at this late time in the evening, these are short one-line definitions, but they're the last 2 on your, list of terms. Okay, portico. You should have heard that term. They talk about the White House porticos, right? Whenever reporters stand in front of one of the 2 entrances, usually the main one at the front that faces the street, right? They say, I'm in front of the South portico sometimes. Anyway, that's where you see the news coverage of the White House. Any building with this style has this. So here's the definition. The portico is a columned porch across the front of an ancient Greek or Roman temple. Now we're giving the definition from ancient times. I'll repeat it one more time. Portico is a columned porch across the front of an ancient Greek or Roman temple. The Romans copied this style literally verbatim in their temples as well. Okay, so this has a portico, and then the final new term for tonight, new definition, is pediment, and that's also short. Pediment is a triangular enclosure around the gable end of a building. It doesn't have to be a temple. There are pediments on Victorian homes from the 1800s, or even in some banks from the early 1900s, like in downtown Petaluma, for instance. If you look up, you'll see this. So they all started with this style, though. Pediment is missing the upper part. Obviously, we're putting the arrow here. There's only a few sections of it is left, but you could tell it once had it totally enclosed. I'll say it again, the definition. Pediment, which is a triangular enclosure around the gable. This is called the gable end of a building, any building. You could say a Greek temple, that'd be okay, because we're only talking about it in relation to Greek temples tonight. All right, that's pretty much the whole meaning. And then we'll do the formal analysis. So it's balanced, yes, because even though these columns are further apart than the ones in the middle in actual terms, real actual distance, nonetheless, they are evenly spaced to each other. In other words, they're symmetrical, right? You draw a line down the middle, clearly it's going to be 4 columns on either side, the same overall space, total space, and number of columns. So it's symmetrical, therefore it's clearly balanced. All Greek architecture was. They love symmetry. And I would call it balanced top to bottom, because when you had the pediment complete, it's not missing that much, but you can imagine it was totally complete. This whole area up here, although that's really not the pediment, but I don't want to get that technical. We'll just say the area above and below the pediment. Total area is almost the exact same area covered by the base. The base goes down to about here. So the stairs and the foundation, or base, combined stairs and foundation, is about the same mass or area covered by the pediment, and that's called the frieze. If you want to know, you don't have to know that term. It used to be another definition I would put in the syllabus, but not now. So all of this area above the columns is roughly equal to the area below, if you want to say it that way. So it's balanced top to bottom. It is full of the rhythm, of course. The columns themselves have each great rhythm, as do the decorations. Remember, that's called the capital. The top, a little, actually, let's go up close. I think, yeah, there you go. You can see it better, right? The capital is this decorative section here. So those shapes repeat. And then there were sculptures here. I forgot to mention one more fact about the meaning, which might be easier to remember. So I'll go ahead and tell you. You don't have to add it if you don't want to, but it's not a minor detail. Why aren't there pieces of sculpture in the pediment? Originally, they were lined. All Greek temples had sculptures through cramming their pediments. There's only one little section here of these two figures. They were stolen by a British noble who was also a general who had fought in the war to help liberate Greece. The Brits fought on the side of the Greeks against the Turks to liberate Greece from the Turkish Empire. And after that victory, they stayed and helped themselves. That's like 200 years ago, right? Very early age. Well, not exactly 200 years ago, in 1820. And so the Greeks won their independence, but they paid a price, an unintended price of some, not all, but some wealthy or powerful nobles, right? High-ranking officials that were in the British military, took whatever they wanted with them from Athens back to London and either kept it in their own mansions or donated it to, which is the case with these sculptures. Where are they? They're at the British Museum in London. And the Greeks are mad about that to this day. They've sued the British government in world court to get them back, and the Brits are not going to give them back. So you want to start an argument between a British citizen and a Greek citizen, just bring that topic up. Anyway, they're not in Athens. They were stolen. That's why they aren't here anymore. But originally there would have been, of course, then there would have been rhythm up in the pediment, but there's still a little bit left of just very small amounts of figures. These are bas relief, right? Remember? So you could just say there's some decorative patterns of geometric shapes and small figures that create rhythm, as do the stairs. There's lots of rhythm. It is almost entirely stable. The only thing dynamic, at least in this photo, is the pediment, and it's only the top two portions that would be diagonal lines. Everything else is straight lines. It's almost entirely stable. The largest mass, well, I just said it's about equal. I would say maybe the base by a notch, but they're about equal. The upper section, including the pediment, you could say the gable end, the whole thing, and the foundation are almost equal masses. And then the next largest, of course, there only is one other main section, the columns. Okay, there's carved line. Carved line is used on these sculptures. You can't see in this slide, so you could just say, there's some, small area of carved line just below the pediment. That's the either way to say it. Decorative detail, you could say, that's used with carved line, created by carved line. And then the columns always had these flutes in Greek architecture. Fluted, I don't mean the music instrument, the shape. Here, why don't we go up and see? They aren't smooth round columns. They never did. Well, they did early on, they did, way back in archaic times. But with classical Greek temples, the columns are decorated with that carved line. You have to know the word fluting, but that's the right word. So there's more line. It's all carved. There's no painted line here. The building was bright colors and was painted when it was new. We now know that. There's evidence of that, but it's too hard to, imagine that. So we just talk about what you can see. And speaking of color, it's a warm yellowish marble. It's a beautiful color. You'll see my own slides close up, where the color of the entire structure has this deep, rich, almost light lemon yellow. You might say lemonade yellow, but it's a beautiful color and it's warm. Most marble's cool, but not here. Okay, and then we have for space, well, it's real. We have a large open rectangular space. Was several rooms originally, but the walls have been blown out except at the back there. So you can just say it is now one large open space with about a 50-foot high ceilings and 46-foot high columns in front. These are 46 feet high. So those are the real space depth. Remember, with the building, space is the real dimensions or size of the sections. So all you have to mention is the height of the ceiling, 50 feet, and the columns about 46 feet. Stable, already said that. There's nothing dynamic. Let's see. Oh, modeling is just the shadows from the sun. I think that's it. Yeah, right. Okay, moving on. This is not a must-know. I just thought you'd find it interesting, and a slide librarian gave me this slide. I didn't even know it existed in our slide library. I pay, I don't know how to pay her. She got paid by the college, I'm sorry, for all of us, as part of her job to create these files from our old slides. I'm talking about the original Kodak carousel slides that I used to use. uh, old days. Anyway, this is how the Parthenon looked when it was new. This is a full-scale version of it in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know what the heck it's doing there. I've never been to Nashville. I have friends who have, but I think that this is some kind of public building, like maybe the county courthouse, but it doesn't say that. Actually, no. I think it's actually no. I take it back. I think it's a church or some kind of religious edifice, not Greek ancient religious. Not that kind of religion, but some more recent Christian sect. I think it doesn't matter. The point is, it's exactly what this building looked like. And here's the pediment group. It's called, these are the pieces of sculpture. There's Athena, see, in the middle, the largest figure. She was also a warrior, as well as the goddess of wisdom. And all those figures, the original in white marble, are now sitting at the British Museum. But here they are recreated in Tennessee, of all places. And here's your 46-foot high columns with the original detailing on the pediment. It's pretty interesting to see that. And then here it is from across a little river, I guess, or lake. Okay, this is not a must know, but I like showing it to you because the Amazon, not the company, not the Bezos, first trillionaire in the world, that, you know, that's his goal. He will too. The first trillionaire in the world, that's just, well, anyway, what is he now? We're 200 billion. Yeah, anyway, not that Amazon or that company, but the original meaning of the word Amazon was the Greeks' name for a tribe of fierce female warriors who were really able to give them a run for their money. In other words, you have to write this now. It's not on the syllabus. This is called the Erechtheum. That's the title, one word, of this temple. And it's on the Acropolis, where I meant to mention that, but you don't have to add that much detail. The hill above Athens, where the 5 most sacred temples were all built, including the Parthenon we just saw, is called the Acropolis, which translates in Greek to fortified hill. And by the way, the Russians use the same exact word. The Russians are a spin-off of ancient Greece. Now you're going to say, what? Yes, look at their history. Their alphabet is basically ancient Greek with modifications. It's called Cyrillic. They also have an Acropolis. It's called the Kremlin. That's the Russian word for Acropolis, both of which mean fortified hill. So their fortified hill here was only for temples, not military fortifications. And this was a temple where the treasury, all of the gold that Athens had, the richest city in ancient Greece, was all kept in this building. So it had to be guarded. And these are caryatids. Caryatids are female columns. They're female figures, heroic, larger than life, you know, scale. They call it heroic scale. They're 8 feet tall. The Amazon warriors were, some of them were easily 6 feet, maybe even more, and they roamed the plains of what's now Ukraine, but back before there was a Ukraine, it was all part of Russia. Some of you know this if you know the history of Eastern Europe. And so they were fierce warriors to the north of Greece, and they would invade the northern provinces, you know, raid the borders of Greece. And the Greek army had trouble, you know, battling. They would win most contests between. They were great horse women and fierce warriors, and the Greeks admired and respected them. So they used them as the models for the caryatids or female columns, or sculptures functioning as columns on the side or porch of this temple. Also, any art museum built in this country before about 1940 and east of the Missouri River, I said this last night, and 1 or 2 of my students said, oh, I know what you mean. If you've been to Kansas City, St. Louis, Cleveland, Chicago, Philadelphia, all of those big cities, Boston, Washington, D.C., you will see in at least one, most of those cities have more than one art museum, but one of their more famous styles is the Greek classic style for art museums all over the eastern half of the U.S. anyway. And they almost all have caryatids, just exactly copies of this same set of figures, and usually the same size, about 8 feet tall, to support the entrance or, you know, the porches of their museums. Okay, so that's not a must-know. I just thought you'd find it interesting. Now we get to the next must-know. It's the Temple of Athena Nike. Okay, yes, that word is the word from which the name of the tennis shoe and the company that makes it took their name. She was a minor goddess. I'll explain who she was in a minute, but let's clarify. The title again is Temple of Athena. Pretty sure I spelled that already, Athena. Nike, I think you all know how to spell, Nike. The architect, one of the 2 same guys who did the Parthenon, but he just worked alone here. Kallikrates, Kallikrates, Krates, 425 BC. Okay, so what are we looking at? A classical Greek temple, yes, but way smaller than any others. It's one, here's how to write, it's one of the 5 sacred temples on the Acropolis. So now you should write that word with a capital A. Acropolis. You probably know that word if you've ever been to Greek restaurants in the Bay Area. About a third of them are named the Acropolis or something like that. You know, the Parthenon, or Athena. It's a popular name for Greek restaurants, at least where I grew up in the Midwest. So that is what this is. But let's take another look at the setting, even though this is the view if it's on the exam. I'm not saying it will be. I might cut it from the study list, but don't assume that. So take good notes. This is a very old slide. You can tell by how faded it is. It was the original slide we had, actual physical slide to use in the slide library. There have been better ones recently taken by the slide librarian. This is the city of Athens, a city of 7 or 8 million people. It's a major metropolis, the most polluted city in Europe too. When this slide was taken, it wasn't as polluted. And so you see where the temple is. It's at the edge of that fortified hill, the Acropolis, overlooking the hill below. So that just to give you some context. But now back to the main view we're going to use. It's a small temple, perfectly proportioned, again, in that same classical Greek style we talked about with the Parthenon. Well, after all, the architect is one of the 2 that built or designed the Parthenon. So you'd think it would have the same style. It does. It's only got 15-foot high ceilings with about 12-foot high columns. We'll get to that when we do in a few minutes, the formal analysis. But what was inside it? Well, a sculpture of Athena's messenger, a minor goddess, of course you'd have to say goddess, who was the messenger and you could say companion. She was always with Athena, but she was a normal adult female size. And here is what she looked like. And here's a better image of that. The slide library found some of these new slides that weren't there when the first time I started gathering my collection. Anyway, you see it's missing the head, of course, but look how perfectly proportioned the figure is and how beautifully detailed. It's her with robes on and she's adjusting her sandal. And that was the sculpture that was in this temple dedicated to her as a minor Greek goddess. It was on the back wall. It's been removed because of the pollution I just mentioned. That's part of the meaning. Why isn't it there now? This one wasn't stolen by the Brits. It was taken down for safety, for safekeeping, to avoid it being eaten away by the really bad air pollution. Athens is so bad that they restrict cars to every other day by license plate number. It's one of the first cities. Some cities are doing that now in Asia too, I guess. But no other city before Athens. Now, when I was there 30 plus years ago, they were already ordering people. Taxis, whatever, private vehicles, buses only could operate on certain days depending on whether the licenses ended in even or odd numbers. So they tried to keep, traffic down to half of what it would otherwise be. Didn't help much. It was still polluted when I was there. Anyway, so to protect the sculpture, it was taken down decades ago, I think in the 50s or something, and taken and put inside a museum where you can see it now. It's in Athens. I've seen it. Now this is missing the entire pediment. And it's not due to an explosion. It's just time. It's just the weathering, it's called. The effect of weathering, right, over thousands of years. But it has never been destroyed or damaged by explosion or war or anything like that. And it's perfectly proportioned, just like we were saying. But this doesn't need to have the differential spacing between the columns. It's not big enough. That only applies to very large temples where the columns are massive and there are multiple, like 8 or more of them. So it doesn't have that in stasis, it's called, or mathematical equation. Didn't need to. The columns look as they really are, evenly spaced. You don't have to write that, but you could. There's one more fact about the meaning. And it's missing the pediment, as I mentioned, but the portico is intact. Okay, formal analysis. It's a cool gray color. It is the real texture of the marble with only minimal simulated texture on the figures, which you can't really see. So you can just say that, just write that, because obviously there's a few small figures. They are small. I guess there are different images of Athena at different time. When it was new, of course, you just saw the image of what it looked like. That had carved line to create very accurate and very detailed simulated textures. Okay, and then we have the rhythm of the columns and those figures carved and the geometric patterns between them. That's called a frieze. You might want to, in this slide, if you go and get that specific, that is the right word. The pediment is above it. That's not there, so there's no rhythm left for the pediment because you can't see it, but there is the rhythm of the stairs. Now the largest mass for this temple is the base with the stairs, because that's clearly bigger than what's left above the columns. And then that second, and then the columns, of course, or third. The modeling again is the natural shadows from the sunlight. And here you have, let's see, yeah, the rhythm, of course, we already mentioned. Oh, it's stable. It's almost entirely stable because there is no pediment. Originally, that was the only, would have been the only dynamic segment. And the sculpture of her on the back wall, but that's not there, so you don't have to write that. To say as it stands now, it is entirely stable with straight lines everywhere. And it's completely balanced, all Greek temple, all Greek architecture, whether they were temples, private residences, public buildings, they always were symmetrical. The Greeks were obsessed with symmetry. And modern architects like Frank Gehry couldn't care less, right? His buildings are everything but, or anything, I mean, but symmetrical, deliberately asymmetrical. But most of the world of the Western, you gotta say that, Western world, but actually a lot of parts of Asia too. I've been all over China and Vietnam and Korea. You do see symmetry in the ancient temples there too. People tend to, subconsciously feel more comfortable with symmetrical art and especially architecture. But of course, that's not a rule. It's just a kind of a human reaction that many people feel. All right, let's see. Are we missing anything? Line, yeah, carved line. I already said that. The color is cool gray. Okay, now I'm going to cut one of the next sculptures, and it's this one from the study list. So we can still end early even after we see my slides at the end, assuming they don't freeze up like they had once or twice in the past lectures, but I think they'll be all right. So you guys are getting a break. I usually do this at least every other lecture, and I will then cut. Remember, on the day we review, 2 weeks from tonight for the midterm, and the same thing with the last class before the final, I will cut the study list for the syllabus for each half of this course by at least 40%. But that'll be later. But for now, we're just cutting one tonight. Young Warrior, it's the 4th slide down. Just cross it out, okay? I'm going to tell you what it is briefly, but you don't have to take notes. Won't be on the midterm. Young Warrior from Riace, Italy. Here it is. It's a perfect example of a man standing in contrapposto, and his physique, again, is so perfect that you know he was favored by the gods. He was a warrior who would have been carrying, I think you can tell, you'll have to write this, but I just briefly think it might be interesting for a few of you to know why this is considered such an important work, for 2 reasons. One was when it was created, it was considered a perfect example of the favored physique of the gods of this man. And who was he? He was a warrior who would have had almost certainly a shield or a sword in this hand. We don't know which, but the fact that he has a guard around his, see it there on the back view of it? It's the same figure from the front and back. It probably was a shield. And then a sword or knife, a dagger or sword in this hand. The odds are pretty good that he would have had those. That's what he would have gotten into battle with. Now, did he go into battle nude? That question has come up occasionally over the decades I've taught this course. The evidence is out on that, but most historians, including myself and all the research and reading I've done, it doesn't make sense that they'd have leaving them totally unprotected. They probably didn't go into battle, but sometimes they might have. So certain times, just say it sometimes. You have to write that though, if you're thinking about that as a topic for one of your papers or extra credit. Yeah, sometimes the warriors, Greek warriors, we're talking about ancient Greek warriors specifically, might go into battle with only a shield and armor and of course wearing sandals. But most of the time they were protected by armor. So it makes very little sense to think they would have exposed themselves literally and figuratively to harm, to injury that way. Okay, and the last reason it's famous is Michelangelo saw it. It was pulled from the sea in the 1500s while he was still starting his career as a sculptor. And you know how famous he is for his sculpture. He went down to this part of Italy. It's a town, I've been there. It's a small city in southern Italy on the coast. They found it buried in a ship packed in grease. Otherwise, how could it be this perfect? It's a Greek sculpture packed in grease. Sorry, I can't resist that one. No, otherwise, it would just turned into rust. There would be nothing left sitting at the bottom of the ocean for 2,000 years, 500 years ago, minus 2,500. So 2,000 years it sat at the bottom of the sea in a shipwreck. or wrecked ship. And it was found intact, this piece, along with a few other pieces of sculpture, because it was packed in crates, surrounded by grease that turned, solid, in the cold, it was really cold water down at the bottom of the ocean or the sea, the Mediterranean, of course. So that's why it's preserved intact like this. You don't have to know that, just interesting. Okay, now one last must know. There's another view of it. I'm going to do one other I skipped over because it's not a must know. It was never on the syllabus. But this is either Zeus or Poseidon. Zeus was the main god of the Greeks, and he ruled over Olympus, and he, was the one who made the decisions about what gods did what, who they favored, and which humans they tried to intervene with, and why. He was the head honcho. It could be him, or it could be, I think it's Poseidon, which the other word is Neptune. I think the Romans called him Neptune and the Greeks called him Poseidon. I believe I have that right. In any case, the god of the seas, he would have, if that's the case, in a raised hand, which is empty now, he would have had a trident, three-pronged harpoon, and he would have thrown it at whatever target he wanted to, kill or injure. And you can see he's aiming here. It's a brilliant piece of bronze sculpture with a perfect physique. So whoever posed for this also was, quote, favored by the gods, according to Greek philosophy. Okay, moving on here. Alexander the Great, I have to briefly mention, it's not a must know. I think I'm going to add it to the syllabus next semester, but for now it's not. So you can just listen for like 2 or 3 minutes. This is a mosaic, made out of colored glass, by the Romans, copying from an earlier Greek one, showing the victory of Alexander the Great over Darius, the king of the Persians, the ruler of the Persian Empire, which, as I said, was the most powerful empire in the whole Middle East until the Greeks conquered it. And they couldn't conquer it. In fact, they were attacked and invaded multiple times, I just said, by the Persians until Alexander came along. If you don't know, I'll briefly summarize, try to do it in less than 2 minutes. Alexander the Great was the son of his father, was the man who conquered Greece from the north. He wasn't Greek, but Alexander was raised as a Greek. He spoke Greek language, he studied Greek philosophy, Greek art. He considered himself a Greek. And he decided Greek civilization was superior, and he wanted to spread it to the rest of the world. He had some kind of vision, which he thought gave him a mission. So at the age of 23, he set out with a mere 30,000. It's not a big army. 30,000, even in the ancient world, they had armies of hundreds of thousands. Merely 30,000 men. He conquered 3 continents in less than 10 years. No other human being has ever done anything like it. So it's rather remarkable what he achieved. In any case, he brought Greek civilization and in some ways, certain advances that, of course, the Greeks had developed over their golden age. All over North Africa, what we now call the Middle East, the whole southeastern third of Europe, right, the Balkans, and then way across Asia, all the way across what would be southern Russia and on into, all those countries. You can't even pronounce the names. The Stans, right? Afghanistan being one of them. On into India. He even conquered part of India. Look how far that is. It's almost halfway around the world from Greece, or more than a third. And he died in India in battle at the age of 33. So in less than 10 years, he conquered 3 continents with an army of only 30,000 men. Obviously, he was a military genius and a political genius, but he was a conqueror, obviously. And this depicts his first great victory. His first victory over the first army he fought was the Persians. Okay, there's a close-up of Darius. Now we're ending with the last must-know, and then we'll segue to my own slides for just about 15 minutes or maybe 20. We'll end about 9:45 or so, 9:40, 9:42, or 9:45, maybe a little earlier. Okay, but this is an important one. I'm not saying that's so important I absolutely won't cut it from the study list, but it's more important than some others. So I would just say consider it, in the middle somewhere. It has a high possibility, but not a very, very high probability of being on the midterm. Okay, here we go. The title, Nike, and then in parentheses, you don't have to put parentheses. You can use a colon if you want. Nike or comma, winged victory, or some call it winged. They pronounce the ed. It's obviously the word winged with the ed. Winged victory, Nike, comma, or parentheses, winged victory. That's the title. The location, we don't know for sure. Some people think they know who the artist was, but we're not sure. So we give you the location. It was a Greek island where it was found. Samothrace, one word, S-A Mothrace, Samothrace, 190 BC. So now we're in a period called Hellenistic, and that's a definition I actually usually put on the board when I'm doing in-person teaching in Annalee Hall. But since it's late and we're all on our laptops and our eyes are getting tired, I'll just tell you what the word means as part of the meaning of this slide, and you won't have to write it as a definition standalone, nor will it be on the as a fill-in on the midterm. But that's the last period of ancient Greek art during Alexander the Great's empire. So he conquered this huge empire. Now, when he died, it split into 3 parts, and then an even more split into more parts. And eventually the Romans conquered, most of it. But at the time that it was considered an empire, even when it was after his death, it was called Hellenistic because he wasn't technically Greek. That means from Greece or of Greek heritage. So Hellenistic, that's H-E-L-L-Y. I showed you that at the beginning of the lecture tonight with 2 L's, right? Like the name Helen, I-S-T-I-C. Hellenistic is a period of late Greek art and culture from about 350 to 150 BC. From the time of Alexander the Great's father, so it goes back before his empire, and then all the way to the Romans coming and conquering the Western world, and we'll talk about them next week. So that's a 200-year stretch, and during that period, how do we recognize the style of Hellenistic art? What's different about it? Slight differences, but not insignificant between that and earlier classical Greek art. And there's only 2 that you have to know in the notes for the meaning of this slide. One is much more detail and decorative. The style itself of the figures, they're carved with more detail and more decoration. Look at that on her wings and even on her robes. This is, remember who she is, the same one we just talked about. It's the same figure, Athena, Nike. Sorry, I said Athena. Athena Nike means this is Nike. And that's really a better way of saying it is just, if you want to keep it short, that is Athena's messenger. That's what she is doing in this. We'll say what is she doing in just a minute. But let's define what the second feature that marks this as Hellenistic style. First, the excessive detail, or you can say extra or greater, that's fine, greater detail on all of the sections of a sculpture in Hellenistic style. That is always the case. You see that on every part of it. And then the third thing, second feature that distinguishes from earlier classical architecture, you can't see it because the heads are missing, but on every Hellenistic sculpture that's intact, there are plenty of them all over the world that I've seen, there's more emotion. But even here, the body language conveys that. This is an intense moment. That's the other part of the meaning. What's happening here? And what would the emotion have been if you could see her face? Well, you can sense it from her body language. She is landing on the prow of a ship. That's why it's called Winged Victory, after a Greek naval victory, to reward the sailors who won that victory, because Athena ordered her to. That's her job. Her job is to deliver whatever message or rewards Athena asked her to, down on Earth. So she's landing from Olympus, right, down on the prow of a boat. She's just literally touching. You see her feet have just touched down. Her wings are still outstretched. You can feel the breeze in her wings even and hear the flapping of the feathers. This piece, by the way, where is it? It's in Paris. It was taken, probably the word stolen is appropriate, by the French, I think during Napoleon's time, and taken to the Louvre in Paris, where it's been on display in the Grand Staircase. You don't have to say that. You can just say at the Louvre in Paris for over 200 years. And again, the Greeks would like it back, but they're not going to get it back. So it was found without the head, obviously. So she would have shown the emotion of pride, of pleasure and pride that is being conveyed through her from Athena down to Earth, to those sailors. They're going to get gold, they're going to get a feast, they're going to have a happy marriage to, whatever wife they want to marry or whatever that they're, wanting to have a family with, and maybe that will be their reward is a future happy family life. It could be anything. That Athena, they were gods, so they could do what they want with humans. They could reward the victors of a naval victory any way they wanted. If they were Greek, they were, of course, furthering the glory of the Greek gods, so they would get a reward, and that's what's happening. She's delivering the message of happiness, pleasure, if you want to say it, or pride that Athena feels in the victory, and giving them their reward, or announcing what she doesn't have it in her wings or her arms. It's just later on they'll get their reward, and Athena, the goddess, will give them whatever she thinks they deserve. That's the meaning here. Oh, one last thing. It was used as the symbol for navies all over the world for a long time after this sculpture was found and placed on display. Even the U.S. Navy for a while, I think, but certainly the British Navy and several other European navies used the image of this figure of Athena, Nike, as a symbol of victory. Of course, naval victory is what it's all about. So that's why the parentheses, the subtitle of this is Winged Victory. Okay, formal analysis, and we'll wrap it up. And we'll do about 15 minutes of my own slides or so to finish up. So it's a warm yellow marble. I can tell you, even though here it looks pink. I think this is the last image I have of it. Yeah, of all the slides here. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. Maybe there is another one. No, that's I didn't do that. That somehow is the I should have deleted that. The first Egyptian slide we saw several weeks ago, which somehow the slide librarian put in upside down. Then she put it in right side up, as you know. You saw that. Okay, so just to wrap this up quickly, it's a warm yellow color, but if you want to say it looks pink here, either way, it's warm. Of course, it's a single mass, or is it? No, it turns out that the prow of the ship is part of the original sculpture. They found it separated in pieces, but so there's two masses, her and the prow of the boat or ship. And then we have the rhythm, of course, the body, the arms, the legs. Look at the feathers on the wings themselves. Lots of rhythm, and it's totally dynamic. There are no straight lines here, except maybe the edge of the ship's deck or prow. I guess just the prow is all you see. Maybe that is, even it's at a diagonal, so it's almost entirely dynamic. And so we have simulated texture, superb. Look at that with the wings, the feathers here. If you ever touch bird feathers, anybody? I did once with my daughter on a second grade science field trip at Lawrence Hall of Lab up in Berkeley, Hall of Science, I'm sorry, I meant. And if you do that, if you ever have, it's the only time I ever got close enough, safely, of course, with controlled, scientists standing there making sure you don't harm the birds and that they stay calm. And we were allowed to just gently touch the feathers on the wing of a bird. It's a very, very unusual sensation. And this artist captured it beautifully here. That's all, of course, simulated detail, simulated textures with carved line done. There's no technique for modeling. It's the lighting from the museum. It's balanced. It would have been originally with a head, of course, in the middle, but now the wings and the legs are evenly spaced, of course, and it's got, all the parts are present, so it's completely balanced. And for space, it's about a 5.5 foot tall figure. It was originally with the head. And I don't know, you could say just one technique of overlapping, the clothes overlap the body. Okay, any questions? I'm going to see if I can do this. I hope I can. Yes, I think I can go directly to the file I'm trying to find. Oh, you see, this is the thing about Zoom I don't like. Well, it won't take long, but it's just, why did it do that? It should have left the other file that I had spent all that time preparing. So I just have to go to, this should take about 90 seconds. Okay. Let's see, what do I have to do? Get this. There we go. Okay, here it is. I'll pull it up now. I've had to do it this way, I think last week, right? All right. So we'll do the Greek and Roman slides, Greece and Turkey. Later on, we're going to see Istanbul. You really want to see those slides. It's one of my favorite places. Now, I may or may not have to hit open here. I don't think I do, but I did one of the 3 times I showed this. So let's see if this works. Let's keep our fingers crossed. And I have to hit screen sharing. So how do I get, oh yeah, I know how to do it. Okay, get this. Okay. Let's do this screen share. This should do it. Okay, keep my fingers crossed, and you guys will let me know, right, if you can see this. I hope. Get away, get away, get away, get away. There we go. Can you see this?
Yeah, we can see it.
Good. Yeah. Okay, this is the Parthenon. And when you could walk up close to it, you could see the columns up close. And if you really stood there and noticed, rather than just walking by, as most tourists do, of course, they're in a tour guide group, so they have to move at the pace the tour guide does. I prefer going by myself or going with locals. That's a good way to see any culture. I know many of you have done this already, but if you're traveling for the first time, and some of you will be, to foreign countries, you said in your mini bios, many of you have that plan. Once we get back to safe travel environments, we will. I recommend that we'll go into a guided tour, but then, the trouble is you don't know until you take the tour, whether you're going to have, 2 minutes or 20 in a place, or whether you're going to be able to linger and look around. So some tour guides, they'll tell you exactly, so you'll know. But if you have the other alternate choice, I would just find a local who speaks English, obviously, and that's actually the best way to go. They know the history of their own culture. Most of them do very well, and love to share it. At least every country I've been to, where you meet someone, either from that country or you already knew someone, as I often do before I arrive. Okay, this is the side view I want to show you. See what happened when the explosion occurred? If you can see the columns, literally stop right here, where the Turkish gunpowder just, wiped out. There's another view, isn't that? But look how perfect the stairs are. The sharp edges, 2,500 years of sitting in the open air, rain, and pollution from the city below. And yet they are still that sharp. Those haven't been restored, but these columns, they have been. You might have guessed this. The darker segments are modern concrete replacements, and they've re-erected these from after that explosion. They didn't start doing that until, I think, around 1890 or even early 1900s. So slowly, over the last century or more, the Greek government has been re-erecting a few columns, but not very fast. And I don't think they want to or can afford to restore the whole thing. Well, they maybe they can afford to, but they have other priorities. The last I read, they weren't planning to finish rebuilding it exactly as it once looked, even though that'd be interesting. That would be kind of, I think one of their government ministers said, a bit Disneylandish. Yes, I think of what he said. So they'll probably leave it in partial ruin, but it has had some restoration. And let's see, I think you can see in the next slide, yeah, the color almost of the yellow. So, well, here it looks still kind of a off-white, but it is a yellowish, warm color when you actually get up close. You can't get this close to these columns now, or to these stairs, I should say. There's, scale for you. There are tour groups. And maybe you can tell that there's rust on the tops of some of these columns. So let's take a minute to talk about that. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Yeah, let's just back up. And you can see it here. That's good enough. What's that from? Stone doesn't rust. That's from the arrogance of the British. Okay, sorry, I mean, I have British heritage in my background, so I'm not knocking the entire British country or people at all. I love the country, and every time I've gone there, I've had a nice visit. However, when they occupied Athens after they helped the Greeks kick the Turks out, I told you that they stole things, right? But another thing they did was they thought they were wiser or more, better educated in engineering than the Greeks about their own culture. So they told the Greeks, they pressured them, let's just say, you could say lorded it over them, to use an old phrase, by convincing them to let the British engineers take over the original restoration of the first few columns. So what does that have to do with the rust? They put metal clamps in between each. See this here? That's called remember we talked about, that's the capital. You have to know that word for the exam. Section of the column at the top. And then each of these sections also, some of them have rust, though you can't see it in this slide, but when you get up close, you can. So why is the rust there? Because they foolishly ignored what the Greeks told them about how their original ancestors adhered each section of the column. As you probably know, the columns were never solid. They're always discs of stone joined together with wooden pegs. And the bad thing, there's a double danger or risk from using metal clamps, which again, the Greeks told the British engineers, don't do that. It won't be good. It'll cause problems. And they wouldn't listen. And here they are, 100 plus years later, 150 years later, they're having those problems. The two problems with metal, one is they rust, of course, and the other is that metal expands and contracts with heat and cold, which cracked some of the sections. So guess what? The Turkish government is spending more money now on the restoration than anything else, replacing the stupid British misguided use of metal clamps and replacing them with treated wood clamps that if they're, out of the air and the moisture, of course, they would be insulated by being placed in the middle of each disc, right? Then those can last for hundreds of years and not cause rust or expansion and cracking. Okay, let's go now to, there's a Temple of Athena Nike. There's my slide of it. You can see the city below. And here it doesn't show the pollution. That was a clear day, I guess. Able to get that. But this is the largest and best preserved of the ancient Greek theaters. The theater is nothing created by the Greeks. We have a lot of things that we, you could say, legacy from them or owed by them that they created that didn't exist before. Public theater performances or an ancient Greek concept. So here, 5,000 spectators could sit in this arena and look down at the actors below. And it had the most perfect acoustics of any outdoor theater I've been to. Anybody been to the Greek Theater in Berkeley? UC Berkeley? Well, if you go to school there or you have friends there, you might see a performance. I got to see, you won't know. Linda Ronstadt play there and the Rolling Stones and Paul McCartney after the Beatles broke up. Kind of an interesting bit. So that particular place can hold 3,000 people. It's one of the largest Greek-style theaters in America. This held 5,000. How did it survive for 3,500 years? 2,500 years. It was buried under rubble, and it was rediscovered by British archaeologists. In this case, they didn't mess it up. When they found it, they gave it over to the Greek government. So you can go there and see plays. Every night during the warm months, they have live plays. Some nights of the week in ancient Greek, you wouldn't understand a word, and some nights in other languages. This is a different theater. This is in Delphi, so we're going to end up with this. Delphi is where the Greeks believed the oracle, they called it, the Oracle of Delphi, would tell you your future if you paid a certain amount of money. It was, I don't want to call this scam, that's too simplistic and modern a term, but it was kind of a con, you might call it, or a game that they played on fellow Greeks who were desperate to have answers to life and death or important questions. And if they couldn't get that out of their doctor, there were doctors, and of course, or their priest, at a temple, or anyone else that, they knew in their own hometown, they might travel hundreds of miles, because Greece, the distance can be that far, across Greece to this mountainside town called Delphi. And they had to stay there for up to 2 weeks, sometimes longer, and therefore, of course, spend their money on, guess what, food and lodging, and therefore enriching the local economy. It was a clever, thought out scheme. I'll call it a scheme, not a con so much, because what were they doing? They would go to the temple. That's not where the temple was. I'm sorry, this was where misspoke. The temple of Delphi was here, but the oracle would be somewhere in the back in a separate room, and almost certainly a live human being speaking through a megaphone. They had megaphones then, they're round metal megaphones, just like you see in some demonstrations today, just no electronics, right? And they could have projected their voice, and they literally could have used smoke, mirrors, all that corny, those phrases, to create special effects, and their voice could be disguised. And so people thought they were hearing the actual voice of the oracle. But let's go to the other building I was about to talk about. That's the actual, what's left of the columns, not much. You see how the primitive, archaic architecture was different. These don't have flutes on them, and they don't have very decorative capitals, and they're not spaced apart to look even. They're just wherever, the architect wanted. And this is a back alley of Delphi. This would have been, one of the residential neighborhoods and a wall protecting it. It was a good sized city, like 30,000 people. Now that's a Roman chariot theater, or chariot amphitheater, where the chariot races were held locally. When the Romans conquered Greece, they brought their gladiator games and their chariot races to Greece. And so Roman and Greek citizens would have mixed or mingled in these seats here. fascinating. Look at the mountain behind him. That's the mountain where Mount Olympus, at the very top of it and just behind it, the highest peak in Greece is where they believed that all the gods lived. And here's a close-up of those stairs. These are worn away, unlike the ones at the other one was, let's see, the one I showed you earlier. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It'll come to me. Okay, here, this is what I wanted to show you. Let's get a close-up. This is another little perfect temple, like the one at Temple Athene. But here, it's the treasury of Delphi. This is where they got all the gold from all these, well, let's just say slightly gullible visitors who believed they were going to have the future told to them, but they had to wait and spend money. And they only accepted gold, from what I've read, at least during the heyday of that system or scheme. And so you would then first go here and pay the treasury of the city how much ever money they ask you to for how many days you were staying, waiting to talk to and ask a question from the oracle, plus a fee to talk to the oracle on top of that. So they cleaned up, you could say it that way. In any case, that's what's left of their treasury. And then we'll end up with a last couple of slides, which was during or right after a thunderstorm. I got to see lightning bounce off the base of this temple, all that's left of these 3 columns, and you can see some of the modern restoration of concrete between the marble, right? This is the original marble. It was a round temple. The Greeks invented that. They're fascinating. There are still some intact in both Greece and Italy. Anyway, so when this temple was intact, it would have had a statue of one god. I'm not sure which one inside of it. But when I was there, a lightning or thunderstorm started and lightning strikes. I got to stand under, not under a tree. That would be stupid. I almost did that. I was standing near a tree when a Greek security guard saved my hide, probably. He said, sir, he spoke English, come here. He had a guard shack that he was assigned to, back and forth to patrol from. And it had a lightning rod. There we go. What that Benjamin Franklin invented, right? Which projected the lightning or protected the people inside by projecting the lightning away from the building. Luckily, it never even struck that little guard shack. While I stood there and watched large bolts of lightning, some of them 20 feet long, bouncing off of this. And I was so mesmerized, I didn't even try to take pictures. I don't know if they would have turned out if I had, but that's after the storm. And then here's the same. You see, here's how those decorations would have been on the Parthenon. Bas-relief figures of mostly animals, mostly horses, of course. Sometimes other sacred animals, cows and things, and gods and goddesses lining the frieze beneath the roof line. Now, this didn't have a pediment. It can't. A round temple can't have a pediment. So this one didn't. But here are those ornate columns of the classical era with the fluting, just like you saw on the 2 temples in Athens, Temple of Athena Nike and the Parthenon, and then the capitals with the ridges. I think that might be the last slide. No, this is it. Yeah, this was during the storm. The lightning had stopped, but the water was coming down in buckets, and you can see everything is soaking wet. I got soaked, but at least I didn't get fried. So when you go to a place like that, again, it's just, I don't know if it's common sense, it should be, but for many of us tourists, including myself in some of my travels, I don't always think carefully ahead about what are the dangers, risks of doing this or that activity, whether it's regarding a person in a position of authority or a private setting, religious site, or nature, the risk. And so always the locals are the people you should talk to before you do or go somewhere where it might be risky. Again, the rule of thumb, I've been always said this to all my classes, the opposite of what you often hear here in our culture. It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. No, not when you're in a foreign culture. The opposite is true. You should always first ask for permission and or advice. And I'm glad that guy came to me, because I probably would have been standing out there when the first lightning bolt struck, and who knows, there was nothing else around. I was standing right about there when he yelled at me. And I was the tallest thing in that part of the whole ruined plaza that this is located in. So I could easily have been a victim of lightning. People die, every year in many parts of the world, dozens probably at most, from lightning strikes or severely injured. I think that's the last slide I have. Yeah, then we go to the Greek islands we've already seen. All right, thank you all. I'm going to go back to the screen share thing. Let's do this. Stop share. Okay, don't need to do that now. Yeah. Are there any questions anybody has at the end here about anything we covered tonight, or your papers, or any other aspect of grades? Nope, not at the moment, I guess. All right. Just like to give you that opportunity. I hope you all enjoyed those slides and definitely got the good notes from this. Went much better than last night's class. So this is the one I'm posting. In case you missed part of it and joined it late, the whole lecture will be posted by 7 p.m. on Friday on YouTube under Mark Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures, Art 2.1, Week 6. You can see it starting after 7 p.m. on Friday. Okay? All right. Good night, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your
Thank you.
interest and your attention. All right. Have a good week and good luck on your papers. And I'll check every day except Saturday between now and the day before it's due. If you want to send me either samples or questions, I'll respond as soon as I see your emails. Okay. Good night. Take care.